18 degrees easily, and even where it's cloudy and dull, temperatures in the mid-teens. That rain will trickle a little further south through this evening, perhaps into parts of northwest England and northwest Wales. Further south, it generally stays dry overnight, but again, it's likely to turn quite misty and murky, and it will be another very, very mild night. That rain, though, still around as we head into Saturday morning. Could be a bit of a dull, damp start tomorrow across southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. It will push back further north through the day, so after a respite across the northwest, maybe turning damp here come the afternoon, although the rain won't be as heavy by then. Elsewhere tomorrow, many places dry, but it could be quite, as I say, a murky old start, some mist and even a bit of fog around. Could take a while to clear. If it does stick around, well, temperatures are still likely to get into the teens, so it's far from chilly. But where we see a bit of sunshine, temperatures up to 18, 19, perhaps even 20 Celsius. The winds will be lighter tomorrow. That continues into Sunday, when again, most places will be dry, but fairly cloudy or misty.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Kerr.
Hello, this is Andrew Pearce on GB News. Coming up on my show today, the nation remembers. Villages, towns and cities around the country fall silent to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Later today, I'm going to be speaking to a veteran, 99 years old, and the historian and writer Tessa Dunlop about the role of women in the war. Also, a bonanza of strikes, trains, buses, tubes, nurses, midwives. When and where will it all end? And what will the Labour Party, don't forget, funded by the trade unions, do or say anything about it? And illegal channel migrants. The authorities have braced for another significant surge in small boat crossings this weekend as the bad weather clears. GB News has learnt that criminal gangs are planning a mass launch. Our very own Mark White joins me later on, and I'm going to be debating with an Albanian activist who lives in London. And you at home, you're such an important part of the show. I want to hear your views, so email them in at gbviews@gbnews.uk and I'll put your points of view to those who I speak to. All that coming up, but before that, let's get the latest headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom.
The Chancellor's warning there's a tough road ahead, saying difficult decisions will be needed to restore confidence and economic stability. Jeremy Hunt's set to unveil his tax and spending plans next week in his autumn statement. His comments come as the latest official figures show the UK economy contracted by 0.2% between July and September. The data from the Office for National Statistics follows the Bank of England's warning last week that the UK may be heading for a two-year recession. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has called the latest GDP figures extremely worrying.
Today's GDP numbers are incredibly concerning. They show that the economy has shrunk in the last 3 months, and indeed they show that we are now the only major G7 economy whose economy is still smaller than it was going into the COVID pandemic. So these series of crises are problems made in Downing Street, but it is ordinary working people here in Britain who are paying the price.
The UK has marked Armistice Day with a 2-minute silence. Bells rang out across the country, including the recently restored Big Ben in London, to remember the war dead and mark the end of World War I. A service was held at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire to pay tribute to all those who've served their country. Army veteran Robert Clark told GB News he'd be remembering all those involved in the armed forces, past and present.
We're incredibly grateful, I think, for the services, the parades, the role of the royal family, for example. This is obviously the first year King Charles is going to be heading the services on Sunday. And I think a lot of the armed forces community and the veterans are welcoming, as well as reflective of the passing of Her late Majesty the Queen, the role that she had with the armed forces.
UK authorities and coastguards are preparing for a significant surge in small boats crossing the English Channel this weekend. Bad weather has stopped migrants from illegally reaching the coast for almost a fortnight. But GB News understands with the improving weather, crime groups from Albania are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches tomorrow. It'd be the first large-scale arrival since the end of last month, when just over 14,000 people arrived in 32 small boats. Russia says it has completed the withdrawal of troops from Ukraine's Kherson region. Moscow says all its soldiers crossed the Dnipro River to the eastern bank early this morning. Ukrainian officials, though, say thousands are yet to leave, saying it would take at least a week for them to retreat. Despite withdrawing troops from the region, the Kremlin says Kherson is still a part of Russia. A prolific online paedophile who exploited children as young as 7 years old has been jailed for 26 years. Jordan Croft, who's 26, abused girls online over a 2-year period before being caught by officers from the National Crime Agency. Croft forced his victims to become his sex slaves and blackmailed them into sending photos and videos performing sexual acts on themselves and others. 24 of his 26 victims were under the age of 18. A 16-year-old boy has been named as a murder suspect by the Met Police after a young man was fatally stabbed in London. Officers have said they want to speak to George David as a matter of urgency in connection with the fatal stabbing of Gabriel Petrov-Stoyanov. The 21-year-old was stabbed in Downham in southeast London shortly after midnight last Friday. The force says 2 other people have been arrested as part of the investigation. Just Stop Oil activists have stopped their protests on the M25. Demonstrators from the environmental group say that they're stopping resistance to give the government time to consider their responsibilities to the country. The climate protesters have held up the busy motorway for 4 out of 5 days this week, causing disruption for motorists and leading to multiple arrests. A think tank is warning nurseries will be forced to raise their prices or close because of a drop in funding in early years education. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says government spending on free childcare in England is set to fall by 8% over the next 2 years, while the budget's set to rise to £3.75 billion a year. It says the increase will be partially wiped out by soaring inflation. And teachers in Scotland have announced their first strike date after voting overwhelmingly for industrial action. Members of the EIS union will walk out on the 24th of November after rejecting a 5% pay increase. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says her government's limited by its fixed budget. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Andrew Pearce.
Good afternoon to you. The UK has marked Armistice Day, and 104 years since the end of the First World War, with a 2-minute silence this morning. The recently restored Big Ben struck 11 times at 11 o'clock to remember those who died in military conflicts. So good to hear Big Ben back with us. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, said that as we salute our troops this year, Ukraine's fight for freedom will also be remembered. And people have gathered around the country to commemorate the day and pay tribute to those who served for their country. Our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, is at the National Memorial Arboretum, where a service has been held. National reporter Ellie Costello is in Westminster, and in Northern Ireland we've got reporter Dewberry Beattie in Belfast. Ellie Costello is in Westminster. Our Northern Ireland reporter Dewberry Beattie is in Belfast.
Good afternoon to you, Andrew. Well, good afternoon to you, Andrew, on the 11th day of the 11th month, otherwise known as Armistice Day. And it was just over an hour ago where we heard Big Ben strike 11 times, and it really was the most magnificent sound and silence fell around Westminster as people reflected on our war dead, those that paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. And that sound of Big Ben chiming has been so rare in the past few years, as there has been a huge restoration project on the Elizabeth Tower which has cost a whopping £80 million, but that is finally finished. They have been rehearsing since Tuesday to get that sound perfect for today, and at 11 a.m. it rang out to crowds of people who stood here and paid their respects. And just down to my right is the cenotaph, and there hundreds of people gathered behind metal barriers to watch veterans and our current serving soldiers lay wreaths at the cenotaph. It has been incredibly moving scenes here, and it's particularly poignant this year, Andrew, because 104 years on from the end of World War I, there are still conflicts raging around the world, most notably in Ukraine. And that's what the Foreign Secretary has called on the British people to remember this Armistice Day. James Cleverly said he wants us to remember Ukraine's fight for freedom. Now, he will be at an Armistice Day service in Paris today with Emmanuel Macron, and there will be services all around the country and indeed the world. It's also the first Armistice Day without Her Majesty, the Queen, the head of the armed forces. And for so many veterans, I'm sure in that 2-minute silence, they were thinking of Her Majesty, and they must feel as if it's been a very personal loss for them as well. One of those people is Clive Jones, who is an army veteran. He's a former Welsh guardsman, and he served in Northern Ireland, and he was blinded in an attack on his 26th birthday. He's an incredibly brave man, and I spoke to him yesterday about what Armistice Day means for him.
As a veteran on Armistice Day, I feel in some respects extremely proud to have served and served my country. But on other sides, I do actually feel quite sad and lonely in some respects, because I do think back of those who I've lost, and I do think of their family and friends that are grieving, especially on days like today. A 2-minute silence for me is very important. I think of, first and foremost, my great-uncle Richard, who was a Second World War veteran, served in Normandy and sadly passed away in 1994. Obviously, there are members of my former regiment and friends that I have lost since and I do think of them as well, and the family and friends that are also suffering as well at this time. I'm extremely proud to be a veteran, yes. It's gone from being a serving soldier and the camaraderie and everything that came with it. So actually, when you think of it, being a veteran, nothing much has changed. We still get the help from charities and organisations such as the Royal British Legion, and the camaraderie that you spend with veterans in your local community, especially on weekends such as this, is remarkable.
Well, thanks to our national reporter Ellie Costello in Westminster. Let's go to Northern Ireland now, and our reporter Doogie Beattie in Belfast. Doogie.
Well, hello, Andrea, and welcome to Belfast, the cenotaph here. Why is Remembrance Day so important in Northern Ireland? Well, traditionally, an extraordinary amount of young men and women serve in the armed forces, and this year they are not too pleased. Frustration from them, from the armed forces here in general, because the legislation that was meant to be in place for them to make sure that they weren't continually brought back to answer things that happened during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. You may remember that the IRA were handed letters of comfort during the Good Friday Agreement, but the door was left open for the prosecution of soldiers, and that is very, very frustrating for them. That legislation was meant to be in place. It was basically making sure that they couldn't come back, and of course the last soldier that did come back was none other than Dennis Hutchings, and he died while on trial in Northern Ireland, and he was buried on Armistice Day last year. Now the IRA, if you remember, did blow up the Remembrance Day service in Enniskillen, injuring 63 and killing 12. And Paul Young from the Veterans Association spoke to me and told me just where they were with this at the moment.
Yes, well, last year was probably one of the most disgraceful episodes in the legal history of Northern Ireland as far as veterans are concerned, because this time last year we were burying Dennis Hutchings. He was the first soldier to be prosecuted under the legacy witch hunts. Unfortunately, Dennis, he died before he could finish his trial through serious illnesses. He was denied the right to be found not guilty, and that's why we've been protesting for people like Dennis and all this legacy witch hunts that's been going on, which has been taking our soldiers and security forces to court rather than those that committed the most horrendous human rights abuses against the public of Northern Ireland.
Well, thanks to our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Jackson. West Midlands reporter now Jack Carson is at the National Memorial Arboretum for us.
Yes, Andrew, I'm here at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, where the Armistice Day ceremony commemoration took place today. It was attended by Their Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, who both gave readings as part of the service as well. The memorial here took place in the Armed Forces Memorial. A poignant reminder, there's 16,500 names here on the wall of this memorial, only starting from 1945 to present day. A reminder that while it is 104 years on from the end of the First World War, that conflict has still claimed the lives of servicemen and women in this country as well. The service was attended by currently serving servicemen and women, but also veterans as well. One of those veterans, Major Rob Cross, who served for 40 years as part of the Gurkha Engineers and has also received an MBE for his service to the Gurkha Welfare Trust. I spoke to him about his medals.
Well, the award was for service to Gurkha veterans, and Margaret and I have been volunteer workers for the Gurkha Welfare Trust for more than 20 years. But in addition to that, I've been involved here at the Arboretum since about 2008 or 9, and I designed and supervised the building of the memorial here for the Gurkha regiments.
That was Jack Carson at the National Memorial Arboretum. I'm delighted to say joining me in the studio is my old chum, former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, complete in your poppy. Still hugely important we do this on Armistice Day, even though the number of veterans from those conflicts of the 20th century decreases, obviously, it seems the number of people paying tribute, either at cenotaph or from afar, increases.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the interesting thing is, and you're absolutely right to put your finger on it, you know, the Legion of the Living outnumbers the Legion of the Dead, and, you know, and one is growing. But what's interesting is, and even leaving COVID aside, this morning at Greenford War Memorial, we had the best turnout we've had for years. I think people realise as the world becomes increasingly dangerous, and we just look around us, you don't need me to say what I'm talking about here, people actually realise how important it is to be in a state of readiness, and how crucial it is, and how very significant it is that young men and women actually were prepared to put their lives on the line for democracy. And this is not something that's in an old war film or John Wayne or anything. This is today. This is the reality of life in the 21st century. And you're so right. People are now recognising that, and above all, they're attending and showing respect, and that is so reassuring to those veterans.
And of course, the shadow of war has fallen across Europe in the form of Ukraine, the worst conflict in our time since Hitler. We also, of course, shouldn't forget the role of the British military in the Iraq War. Now, I, for one, opposed that war, but our soldiers took part. And, of course, we've just had the 40th anniversary this year of the Falklands War, when the British Army liberated British territory.
I mean, it was an extraordinary achievement. I mean, one of the things about the Falklands is a lot of people think it was a cartoon. They think it was a film. They don't believe it's reality. The fact that, you know, HMS Conqueror did sink, you know, the Belgrano, the fact that we actually assembled a fleet and got it from Portsmouth to the Falkland Islands in record time is an extraordinary achievement. And the thing is, I'm more proud of our armed forces. I'm not one of these people who actually glorifies every single thing they do, and equally I'm not a person who will actually criticise them overwhelmingly just because they wear uniform. But I have to say, the best thing that the armed forces can do is to defend freedom and liberty. And the Falkland Islanders were under direct threat. A fascist, neo-fascist dictator had invaded their homeland. And what were we going to do? We're going to roll over or do what we in fact did. Young men and women, 17, 18, 19 years old, to the other side of the world to fight for freedom. Some of them are in Goose Green to this day under the ground. Yeah. But above all, what an occasion to be so proud of our country and proud of our servicemen and women.
On Sunday, Remembrance Sunday, King Charles, must remember that, will lead the nation for the first time following the death of his mother. You will be at your local memorial. You are very involved with the Royal British Legion. In what way is that?
Well, I'm the president of the Greenford branch of the Royal British Legion, also the Royal Naval Association. And I think the cenotaph, you know, and Whitehall is important. The eyes of the nation should be on it. And don't forget also the Albert Hall, you know, the service beforehand. But what this is really about is about the localities. It's about the quiet people, the people who don't make a song and dance about this, the people in their own quiet local way, in their local communities, just show respect, resilience and strength.
What do you make of some of your colleagues? I don't want to make this political, Stephen, because you and I will have so much to fall out about throughout.
I don't think we've ever agreed on anything.
No, I'm sure we don't. But some of your colleagues seem to think it's OK to wear a white poppy. I saw up in Scotland a member of the Scottish National Party, a member of the Scottish Assembly. Not only was it a white poppy, it was also had the symbol for independence. I thought, is nothing sacred to that MSP? Even dragging the independence argument into something which is designed to reflect and honour the fallen, the people who had damaged limbs, lost lives.
That's double demeaning, because it's demeaning to the fallen, and it's also demeaning to politics in Scotland. I'm sorry. I mean, my dad was 17 when he joined up in 1939, where you went to see. You know, and he didn't stop and think about, you know, what are people in the future going to say is good, bad or indifferent. He had the call to duty because he felt he had to go. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the white poppy movement is about, you know, peace. Well, fine, wear it, but don't wear it in November. Don't wear it as part of, to take the gloss off Armistice Day or Remembrance Sunday. As far as I'm concerned, that is virtue signalling. It is people sitting there on the tube. I've seen people sitting on the tube smugly grinning and pointing at their white poppy. You know, I'm sorry, it's disgusting.
I actually saw somebody with a white poppy go up to some nice old boys selling poppies in North London. They were seen off with a flea in their ear. Very glad they were, because I thought I was going to go and intervene. But for once, I kept my nose clean.
Probably, well, I was going to say, probably more than I was going to say, probably more than a flea in the ear, I'd imagine.
Just finally on that, if any of your Labour colleagues on the Labour benches were to wear a white poppy, what would you say to them?
Well, one of my Labour colleagues, my former Labour colleagues, did wear it.
Remind me who he was?
Well, he was from Islington.
And I think he was the leader of your party, Jeremy Corbyn?
He managed to be leader without my vote, actually, which was quite surprising. But
you're ashamed of him doing that?
Ashamed for not voting for him?
No, ashamed of him wearing the white poppy.
Yes, but I actually said, there's what point are you trying to make? You're causing offence, but you're not actually causing any support or engendering any sympathy for anybody. The point about wearing the poppy is to actually show that we cherish and respect and revere the memory of the fallen, not to signal some virtuous situation.
Well said, Stephen Pound, denouncing Jeremy Corbyn, who of course was his party leader. You've been emailing in your views on what we're talking about today. On striking, Angie says private sector workers will not be getting anywhere near a 17% pay rise, so why should taxes go towards paying extortionate pay rise for workers paid from the public purse? These strikes are political, and it's wrong a small number of union barons can hold the country to ransom and wreck the country. Strikes will lead to job losses, higher inflation and price increases, and then unions will only be demanding even more. We're going to be talking about that shortly, because that is, of course, the nurses who are after a 17% pay rise, and they are engaging in their first ever national strike. Coming up with nurses, civil servants, rail workers, midwives are being balloted also next month. Are we heading for a winter of discontent? But before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update. Another blustery but very mild day out there. Most places having a dry day, but we've seen some very heavy rain over the past 36 hours over northwestern parts of Scotland, and this weather front is still providing some rain, although it is going to push its way slowly southwards. It's squeezing the isobars together, hence why it is so blustery, but that air is coming up from the southwest, so it is very mild, particularly gusty over southeastern Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. That rain persisting across the northwest of Scotland as well. It's been very wet for Skye and Lewis in particular, and that rain edging into Northern Ireland through the afternoon. For most of England and Wales, dry, some sunny spells, particularly across northeast England, but most just staying cloudy, but it is very, very mild. We'll see a bit more of that rain trickling south through the central belt into southern Scotland, clearing from Northern Ireland and northern Scotland, perhaps a little bit coming into Cumbria for a time through the night, but again, much of the south dry. Could turn quite misty. A few fog patches are possible as we head into Saturday morning. Won't be quite as mild as the night just gone, but still temperatures likely to stay in double figures in many areas. A misty, murky start then to the weekend, particularly over central and eastern parts of England. Could be some dense fog on some of the higher routes in particular. That will slowly clear. At the same time, the rain will slowly work away to the north, so turning dry for Northern Ireland and southern Scotland, and eventually brightening up across parts of northern Scotland too. With some sunny spells in the south, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 Celsius. And the winds will be lighter tomorrow compared to today. Lighter winds and clearer skies means mist and fog is likely to return on Saturday night and into Sunday morning, particularly over eastern areas. So it could be a foggy start to Sunday here. Generally, again, another dry day. Quite a lot of cloud around, but some sunny spells developing. And again, it will be very mild.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Well, this week it was confirmed that nurses had voted in favour of taking strike action. That's the Royal College of Nurses. First time in their 106-year history. They're joining rail workers, civil servants, now teachers in Scotland, in walking out. It's understood unions representing the nurses are demanding a 17.5% pay rise. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has responded saying it's simply not affordable. Ballot dates are now being set for NHS midwives in England and Wales, which have been confirmed by the Royal College of Midwives, who are urging their members to vote in favour of industrial action. Well, joining me now is the journalist and author Ella Whelan. Ella, afternoon to you. I think you may have your own experiences here, but I wonder, first of all, what's your reaction to the fact nurses are going on strike and midwives may follow them?
Well, you used the phrase winter of discontent earlier on. I think that it's pretty significant that nurses are, for the first time in the long history of the Royal College of Nursing, taking strike action. For a very long time, there's been a kind of, I think nurses have felt that they can't take this kind of industrial action because unlike rail workers or unlike, I don't know, bin men, nurses are held as in a different kind of work. They get, obviously they give us a particular level of care. And I think that sort of almost blackmails them into not being able to do what they need to do to get fair wages and decent working conditions in what is essentially a job and is as difficult, if not more difficult, than other jobs. And so even though there's been a lot of criticism because obviously disruption in a hospital or in a GP surgery is going to have very different consequences than it might if you were shutting down a supermarket or something, I think that, given the current climate and the fact that even we all know that wages with inflation aren't exactly meeting people's needs, I think it's right to support this strike action, and I say fair play to them.
But Ella, would you feel that way if it was perhaps your mother or an aged relative whose hospital appointment was cancelled, or perhaps, worse still, died alone because there was no nurse on the ward?
Well, this is why I talked about, the idea of blackmail, which is that any strike action has some kind of disruption. That is why you take strike action, in order to disrupt the normal working
but Ella,
process.
I'm asking you how you would feel if it was your mother or your father. Perhaps they weren't given medicine they were required because the nurse is on strike. Maybe they died alone because there was nobody in the ward to be with them. How would you feel about that? Would you still support the strike, do you think?
Anyone in that situation would feel terrible, in the same way that, when railways were shut down by strike action, nobody was going around saying, isn't it great that I missed my train? That's the nature of strike action, that it's supposed to be disruptive. It's supposed to have consequences. That's the way in which you send a message to your employer that your work as an employee, as a labourer in whatever field it is worth fighting for. And that's how you fight for better wages. Now, you mentioned that I have my own experience. I mean, I've got my baby here in my arms. You might not be able to see him. He's been quiet at the moment. A month ago, he was born in a London hospital, and the level of care I got in that hospital was shockingly bad. It was a really poor experience. And we know that there have been several scandals. Luckily, I have my son in my arms now, but there are lots of women who didn't get to go home with their children. We've heard about the East Kent maternity scandals in Shrewsbury and Telford. And there's a lot going on there to sort of unpick that we don't have time for today. But one thing that's very clear is that staffing levels in hospitals, particularly among midwives and nurses, is very poor, is very low. So what you have is people, often women, who are being pushed to the limit, doing 12, 14, 16, even more longer shifts, or on pay packets of, 27,000, 30,000, who aren't able to give the level of care that they're meant to, who aren't able to do the job to the right standard. And so, you might say, I would feel terrible if my mother missed her hospital appointment because of strike action. But the state of the NHS at the moment is so poor that it's probably comparable, the two situations. And that's what the Royal College of Nursing is saying, is that at the moment, staff are not able to give the right level of care because there aren't enough of them, because they're not being paid enough, and that it's having dangerous consequences. So in that context, I think, what else are we expecting staff in hospital to do?
Well, if I could ask you just briefly, Ella, you said the service you had when you had your baby was shocking. If midwives go on strike, there's going to be no service at all.
but to counter
But it's
that
not about.
argument,
It's not about. That's what's going to happen.
Well, I don't know what you want me to say in terms of that. I've already explained. I think everybody watching knows what happens when strike action is called. Disruption happens. That's why you go on strike. I don't know how many times I can spell that out. But the more important thing is that unless something is done to address the level of care and the staffing levels, and also the kind of the status of the NHS, whether that's sort of rejigging it, I don't think just throwing more money at it is going to solve any issues. But that something needs to change in terms of the level of care. And the central line is, if workers are saying that they need their pay packets to meet the kind of challenges that we have, whether it's cost of living, energy bills, all those kinds of things, then strike action is their only action. And I think if you support the idea of workers being able to stand up for themselves in their workplace, you have to support this, whether it's nurses, train workers, bin men, or anyone else.
Sure. Thank you very much. That's the journalist and author Eloise. Now let's bring you straight back into the conversation, Stephen Powell.
I was there in 78, 79. I was the General Secretary of the Middlesex branch of the Confederation of Health Service Employees. Yeah. In fact, there's just been a TV series about the Winter of Discontent, which features me with a auburn beard and some long flowing hair, looking, if I may say, rather magnificent. But what we did at the Middlesex Hospital was, at the porters, first of all, we met with them and we agreed that we'd cover meals and the mortuary. We'd actually have a skeleton crew there. The nurses weren't all in the RCN, quite a few of them were in COSI, a few of them were in UP. There was a basic cover within the hospital. And then we met David Owen, and David Owen, I think, was the health secretary at the time. And he said, don't forget, after the general strike in 1926, you had 20 years of the Conservatives. If you all go out this winter, there'll be 20 years of the Conservatives. He was wrong. It was 19 years.
Exactly.
So I think you have to be a bit subtle. I mean, a strike is a pretty blunt instrument. And I think what we did at the Middlesex back in 78, 79, to actually say we're making the point, because it was the time of the 4% norm for all that nonsense. We're making that, but we're not going to put patients' lives at risk. We're actually going to make the point. We're going to picket the hospitals. We're going to be outside there making the point, but also going on television, going on the radio and expressing the case. When Ella talked about the 15%, in factual fact, nurses need 17% because they've lost 15% over the last few years. We've got £183 billion a year goes into the health service, and it is in crisis. It is creaking at the seams. It's not working. Please, if there's one thing that can come out of this, one good thing, is there's got to be some sort of a national consensus on what kind of health service we want. And I appreciate this is not your general point. You're talking about the strikes, but the health service is a special case.
That's Stephen Pound. He's going to be with it. I just say what I think. I think the nurses are making a terrible mistake. They've got huge public respect. They're much loved, but going on strike over 17.5% pay rise, I think they're in danger of going where the hospital GPs, remember how respected GPs used to be? Yeah. Whoever gets to see a GP these days? Not me. Now, coming up, we're going to be talking about Matt Hancock in the jungle. Of course we are. Is he an idiot? Of course he is. Should he be there or should he be in his constituency? Of course he should be. I'm going to be speaking to two former I'm a Celebrity contestants, Martin Roberts and Edwina Curry. Talking to Stephen Pound about it too, but first it's your news update.
Andrew, thank you. It's 12:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's warning there's a tough road ahead, saying difficult decisions will be needed to restore confidence and economic stability. Jeremy Hunt set to unveil his tax and spending plans next week in the autumn statement. His comments come as the latest official figures show the UK economy contracted by 0.2% between July and September. The data from the Office for National Statistics follows the Bank of England's warning that the UK may well be heading for a two-year recession. The UK has marked Armistice Day with a 2-minute silence remembering the war dead. A service was held at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire to pay tribute to all those who've served their country. Bells rang out across the nation, including the recently restored Big Ben in London to mark the end of World War I. UK authorities and coastguards are preparing for a significant surge in small boats crossing the English Channel this weekend. Bad weather has stopped migrants from illegally reaching the coast for almost a fortnight. But GB News understands with the improving weather, crime groups from Albania are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches as early as tomorrow. Russia says the withdrawal of its troops from Ukraine's Kherson region is complete. Ukrainian officials, though, say thousands are yet to leave, claiming it'll take at least a week for them to retreat. Despite withdrawing troops from the region, the Kremlin says Kherson is still part of Russia. And Just Stop Oil has suspended its protest on the M25. The climate demonstrators say the pause will allow the government to do what they call the right thing. The environmental group wants the government to halt new licences for the exploration of oil and other fossil fuels in the UK. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew Pearce will be right back.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Now, this is the story that just keeps giving. Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, he's faced criticism from his campmates, the public and fellow politicians about his entry into the I'm a Celebrity jungle. Last night, he was confronted again by news presenter Charlene White and Boy George, who said it was difficult to have him there after his mother had been in hospital during the pandemic. The West Suffolk MP was then voted to take on the Tentacles of Terror trial, where he was trapped in a cage underwater. Not trapped for long enough for me, frankly. But should a sitting MP be able to leave their constituents behind and venture off into reality TV? Joining me now are two former I'm a Celebrity contestants, TV property expert Martin Roberts, of course, and the former Conservative MP who needs no introduction to this station, Edwina Currie. Good afternoon to you both. And, of course, the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound, is in the studio with me, who's just very cross that nobody ever asked him to go into the jungle. Let's ask first, let's go ladies first. Edwina, what was it like in the jungle?
Well, I tell you what, Andrew, you're too nice to be on GB News. I've just watched the interview you've done with Ella, whatever, and talking about nurses. What a selfish madam. I've got steam coming out of my ears. I'm a former health minister, and I'm going to say the things that you should have been saying, such as, you know what, the average salary of trained nurses in this country is £37,000 a year. They are trying to go on strike for an additional 17.5%. They've already had 4.5% this year. And in fact, what the government's trying to do is look after the lower paid workers before they look after the better paid workers. The health service is in many places extremely well run. I've just spent 10 days in hospital. I will name it Macclesfield Hospital, East Cheshire NHS, absolutely brilliant. But what the RCN is doing, and you should have known this, Andrew, and you should have challenged her, is that they're trying to call a strike on a minority vote. Because if you look at the NHS trusts in England, they call the vote trust by trust. And most of the NHS trusts in England voted not to strike, not to strike. And the RCN won't publish the figures. So you can bet your bottom dollar they're not in their favour. Most nurses, I don't think, are going to go on strike. They may well do what Stephen described, which is perhaps be on a picket line. But as for putting patients' lives and treatment at risk, I have to say, what a selfish madam. I can't believe you actually let her get away with that. Right,
Edwina,
now, should we get back to Matt Hancock?
Yes, we can. And I've got Steve. Don't worry, we've got Stephen Pound here, who knows he's about to be attacked over the Labour Party's position. Edwina, tell me, what was it like in the jungle, and how well did you fare when it came to the voting?
Well, most of the people who go into the jungle, and it's true this year, go in for two reasons. Reason number one is they think in some way it's going to enhance their reputation or their career. And reason number two is they're getting paid a humongous amount of money. And that's certainly true for everybody that's in the jungle this year. So those that are reacting with horror to Matt Hancock are being a little hypocritical about their reasons for being in the jungle. I don't think he should be there. I think he's already got an important job. If he wants to raise issues about dyslexia, he can do it on the backbenches in the House of Commons. If he wants to show what a nice guy he is, you have plenty of opportunities in Britain. Does not have to go 10,000 miles around the world to do that. I had a good time. I enjoyed myself. I wasn't trying to do anything more than have a bit of fun, and met a lot of good people, enjoyed myself. Some of the games that they're playing already, like the mole game, is exactly the same as I got involved in with Jake Quickenden in 2014. It's great fun deceiving all your campmates and telling lies to them, and then their faces when they discover they've been had. That's fun.
And did you, as the former MP, find that you were getting more than your share of the bush trucker trials, Edwina?
Well, it started off like that, but as it happened, there was a woman called Kendra Wilkinson, who was an American sort of soft porn star, very, very pretty woman, but absolutely thick as a plank. And she got more of them than I did, because all she ever did was scream. I just kind of pushed the critters out, or if I wanted to reach for a star, I would say, come to mummy, you know, a little like I was treating my dogs or something. And I would hum and sing off tune. I put everybody off. So I was pretending to be a kind of, you know, crazy babushka. That seemed to go down quite well.
Right. Can you sing, Edwina?
You don't want to hear me on GB News. I could rant, but I can't sing.
I mean, as if they didn't have to put up with enough in the jungle, Edwina, then you started singing at them.
I did, and at that time, my husband was a bass in the Tideswell Male Voice Choir, and I used to take him to rehearsals and sit at the back. So unfortunately, the only bits of any songs that I knew were the bass and the baritone sections, which is really kind of weird.
OK. Let me just ask you finally, Edwina, who's going to win in the jungle?
Well, it won't be Matt Hancock,
No.
apart from anything else. In order to win, you need the support of the public, and I'm pretty sure, partly because he's there, partly because he broke the lockdown rules, and people still feel very, very sore about that. And he's an incredibly naive, immature guy. He hasn't figured out that people are genuinely annoyed, and apologising, resigning doesn't actually resolve that. Personally, I think I'd like somebody like Mike Tyndall to do it, because he's such a good guy, such an absolutely all-round lovable good guy. Boy George, no, he's a bit of a pompous. I think there's a short three-letter word for him, isn't there?
There's certainly. That's Edwina Currie, irrepressible Edwina Currie. We'd lost Martin Roberts, the TV property expert, but we've now got him back. Martin, what was your view when you saw the Health Secretary in there? Did you think it was a clever move to try and rehabilitate his reputation, which, let's be honest, is pretty trash, not just because of COVID, but of the appalling way he treated his wife and family?
I think it's a very dangerous move. There is nothing you can hide from in the jungle. I think it's an opportunity for the public to really see the real person, and people will see through any kind of BS. You can't get away with just trying to, you know, do the whole, yeah, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, I'm trying to do it for this, I'm trying to do it for that. People see through it. People see through it more than any other reality TV show I know. And the pressure which everybody else is under, which means they will not cut him any slack. So if he thinks he's going to get an easy ride, he is wrong. You know, is this an opportunity for us to see the lovable, fluffy, warm, you know, kind-hearted, everything that's great about Matt Hancock? Matt Hancock, Well, let's see. I mean, the thing for me will be, at the moment, ironically, being voted to go into those horrible tasks gives you more screen time. So the best thing that people can do is not vote him to go in for those horrible tasks if they don't want to give him a chance to, do whatever he wants to do. The big thing for me is going to be who is voted out first. And if it isn't Matt Hancock, I think that's going to be a real shocker.
Edwina, you've been in the political milieu. You can see why he's trying to do it, but he clearly took no advice because it was a real shock. Is there, if in his gamble, I'm told, is he thinks if he's in there long enough, people will get to see actually he's quite a nice guy, really. But he's constantly being reminded of the fact he treated his wife appallingly. He broke the lockdown rules to have that rather unfortunate grope and kiss with his married lover. And of course, there's the whole controversy as Health Secretary when you were a Health Minister, when on his watch, I'm not saying it was his decision, but on his watch, people who had COVID were discharged from hospitals and put in nursing homes with what we then know was a catastrophic consequence.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right on that. We killed 20,000 people, discharged from hospital, put them into care homes, and COVID just spread like wildfire through an extremely vulnerable population. That was avoidable. That was unforgivable, in my view. I didn't lose anybody in those circumstances. What Matt Hancock's taken into the jungle, and he's not the only one that's there this year, is a massive ego. Somewhere in his teenagerhood, and he was very clever, he ended up with a first at Oxford, somebody should have said to him, Matt, you're very bright, but you don't know everything. And somewhere on the line, other people's opinions do matter. They do count. Your behaviour on several levels has been reprehensible, and you cannot simply wipe that slate clean. I think he said last night, if I heard him right, that one of the best things would be to see Gina waiting for him at the end of the tightrope walk they have to do. He's got 3 kids. The best thing for me to see when I came out was my daughter. And in fact, my little granddaughter was there as well, but we didn't have a TV licence to put her on. I can't tell you how lovely it was to actually see members of my family who love me and who I could rely on being there for me. I've flown halfway around the world to be there.
Right, all right. That's Martin Roberts, the property expert, and the former Conservative MP, Edwina Currie, on Matt Hancock's hapless, hopeless attempts, in my view, to rehabilitate his reputation in the jungle. Stephen, you knew him when he was in the Commons. Yeah. He put the B in bumptious. He was bumptious before he became an MP. He was insufferable when he got into the cabinet. Yeah. What's it doing for his reputation?
But I can still remember when all the Tory MPs went off to some country house estate to have a chat, and Cameron's time. And of course you were.
It was in Eastbourne.
Anyway, all I can remember was somebody saying that they so-and-so was so far up David Cameron's backside you could see the soles of Matt Hancock's shoes.
Yeah, do you go to Stephen Pound to put things so charming?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was actually being polite there.
Yeah.
I was thinking, no, look, at the moment he's covered in slurry and being doused in ordure and excrement. I mean, so, he should be used to that, to be honest.
Yeah, and he said he wants to avoid snakes. Let's hope there's no mirrors in the jungle.
It is.
Now, let's talk about the nurses' dispute, the many strikes that break out all over the country. You know that the winter of discontent brought Mrs Thatcher into power in 1979. The Tories were in power for 19 years.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer, it goes mute when it comes to strikes. He's your leader, of course, in case you've forgotten, Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
He's told Labour MPs he doesn't want them to go on picket lines because he thinks it creates the wrong impression. If it creates the wrong impression, why doesn't he condemn the strikers?
Well, it's not exactly what he said. Look, here's a very important thing. The Labour Party intends to represent all the people of this country.
Right.
We receive about 70% of our income from the unions, no question about that.
Yeah.
A lot of unions, like the RMT, have nothing to do with the Labour Party, and they stand candidates against the Labour Party.
The rail strikes, Unite are heavily involved in that, your biggest bankrollers.
Yes. But can I just say, they are the biggest, certainly, by all means. But look, if the Labour Party is going to get into the situation of getting involved in every single industrial action, then every single Labour MP should be on every single picket line, regardless of what, where and how and why. No, the Labour Party, representing the nation, should actually be the honest broker here. Of course we support the right to strike, but of course we support the national interest. And it's a difficult line to walk sometimes. But the idea that the most powerful unionised workforce in the country can get more than the people who are not unionised is something which is an anathema to any true Labour person.
Yesterday in London, ground to a halt because of a tube strike. Now, I heard people blaming the government. Actually, Transport for London, which runs the London Underground, is it's the job of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Did you hear from him on the airwaves?
I heard, I must admit, I'd actually heard the transport ministers, the two of them, talking for the first time about this. And I think that's important. Look, the moment we've got a problem with declining numbers on the Underground, declining numbers on the buses, and that is going to simply accelerate the process of a financial shortfall. And the union situation isn't helping, but I think this is the 7th strike for the London Underground we've had this year, and it all makes you think people are a tiny bit trigger happy.
It's bad for cafes, it's bad for bars, it's bad for people trying to get to work. People can't get to work. Not everybody, like civil servants, have the luxury of working from home. I pointed out in the Mail this week, the Treasury got quite a lot on its plate at the moment with the big financial statement on Thursday. Half the staff working from home. Foreign Office, half the staff working from home. There's a war in Ukraine. Have they noticed? But so public sector, they can work from home, but people need to get to work, Stephen. They can't get to work on a train. They can't use the tube. And Labour are not condemning their mates in the unions who are shouting out, brothers out.
Well, I mean, that was a Straub's record about 25 years ago. But look,
it was something I grew up with. My father worked for British Leyland, Stephen. He was on the assembly line at British Leyland when they were out and strike all the time in the 70s.
Red Robbo, now you've got skin in the game. That
I do.
Absolutely, I entirely understand that. But look, the situation at the present time is that there are people who are not able to get to work because of this, and obviously we need to actually work our way around that. But the reality is, you cannot simply say that the answer to every single industrial inaction is to pay more money to it, because that way is madness. I think paying the nurses wouldn't be a problem, because that wouldn't lead to price inflation. However, if you actually have, for example, if you had to pay all the RMT drivers who are on a decent wage at the moment,
59,000.
Well, a bit more than that. Don't forget, because and ASLEF, who don't have to work on Sundays except for sort of double bubble. Look, then what happens? Either the government subsidises the transport system even more, or fares go up.
On the nurses, before we move on, Edwina Coe makes a good point. Some of them, on average, being paid $37,000 a year. Because they're in the NHS, they've got a gold-plated pension, which makes the package $50,000 a year. The average wage in Britain is around $33,000. They're not as badly paid as they were, and they were the only public sector workers last year who got a 3% pay rise when the rest was under a freeze.
Well, the police got one as well, and deservedly so. But that's a mid-range nurse. That's a nurse when you're actually a staff nurse or a charge nurse grade. When you start as a nursing student, you don't get anything like that. Barristers get shirt buttons for the first few years, then they fill their boots.
But what I think the government should do is bring back the bursaries, which effectively the state paid their training. Because at the moment, nurses have to pay for their training. How did that happen?
Are we going to agree on this?
Yeah, I think we might. Dangerous. They should bring back the bursaries.
Absolutely. Totally.
Nurses, when they get qualified, should not have £27,000 of debt.
The NHS introduced something called Project 2000, which the idea was it was going to be like an equivalent of a degree. Up until then, if you're a nurse, you did 3 years on the wards, and you did all your different training like that. So, and you got virtually nothing for it. Most people, in fact, actually paid for it. Now we've got 100,000 shortfall in the NHS. Bursaries are so logical and so sensible that I cannot wait for you to take the reins of power and actually crack your whip and get them brought back in again.
We wouldn't let you near a whip. Stephen Pound is the former...
I was a whip.
Yes, you were. We're going to be talking to you, of course, because there's a very important story about Northern Ireland coming up today. We want your views on everything we're talking about today. We're also going to be talking about this Just Stop Oil protest. Charles says, do you know that all tyres for cars, lorries and also bikes are made from oil? So we're going to resort to wooden wheels. We're going to talk about Stop Oil a little later.
I can just imagine sort of these rather entitled people clinging to the gantries saying, what's wrong with wooden reels? As long as it's from sustainable woods and sustainable forests. What an excellent idea. I can almost hear Hermione saying it now.
And listen, and on the nursing strike, James says, the Prime Minister said nurses' demands are unaffordable, yet the government is wasting money paying for hotels to house migrants. This isn't sustainable or a sensible use of money. Your views on the economy shrinking? Colin says, it doesn't seem right the economy's only shrunk by 0.2% when so many businesses have closed, inflation is so high and demand is falling. On the ground, it feels like we're in a much worse state. Well, it could be getting worse. And Nick also says, let's not forget Mrs Thatcher and John Major both sold off hundreds of public assets and destroyed the social housing market. It's had a devastating effect on housing since then. Well, thank you for your views. Keep them coming in. Email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. You're watching Andrew Pierce. Plenty more still to come over the next 2 hours. A roundup of the key political news from this week, the latest GB News People's polls, the US midterms elections. Oh dear, Donald Trump, is it the end?
Humpty
I
Dumpty.
hope so. And I'm going to be joined in the studio, very excited about this, by a World War veteran, 99 years old. She was part of the Bletchley operation to crack the Enigma code. So don't go anywhere. Before that, though, the weather.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update. Another blustery but very mild day out there. Most places having a dry day, but we've seen some very heavy rain over the past 36 hours over northwestern parts of Scotland, and this weather front is still providing some rain, although it is going to push its way slowly southwards. It's squeezing the isobars together, hence why it is so blustery, but that air is coming up from the southwest, so it is very mild. Particularly gusty over southeastern Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. That rain persisting across the northwest of Scotland as well. It's been very wet for Skye and Lewis in particular, and that rain edging into Northern Ireland through the afternoon. For most of England and Wales, dry, some sunny spells, particularly across northeast England, but most just staying cloudy. But it is very, very mild. We'll see a bit more of that rain trickling south through the central belt into southern Scotland, clearing from Northern Ireland and northern Scotland, perhaps a little bit coming into Cumbria for a time through the night, but again much of the south dry. Could turn quite misty. A few fog patches are possible as we head into Saturday morning. Won't be quite as mild as the night just gone, but still temperatures likely to stay in double figures in many areas. A misty, murky start then to the weekend, particularly over central and eastern parts of England. Could be some dense fog on some of the higher routes in particular. That will slowly clear. At the same time, the rain will slowly work away to the north, so turning dry for Northern Ireland and southern Scotland, and eventually brightening up across parts of northern Scotland too. With some sunny spells in the south, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 Celsius. And the winds will be lighter tomorrow compared to today. Lighter winds and clearer skies means mist and fog is likely to return on Saturday night and into Sunday morning, particularly over eastern areas. So it could be a foggy start to Sunday here. Generally, again, another dry day. Quite a lot of cloud around, but some sunny spells developing. And again, it will be very mild.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales,
And Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co.
Hello, this is Andrew Pierce here on GB News, bringing you all the latest of the big stories from the week. Throughout the next 2 hours, I'll be joined by journalist and political consultant Emma Burnell. Coming up, Is Donald Trump toast? I think he is. The former president seemed poised to announce a bid for the White House again, but his star seems to be falling among Republicans after a much worse than expected showing for his candidates at the midterm elections this week. I'll speak to a Republican who supports the main challenger to the Trump throne. And we'll be bringing you all the results of our latest People's poll, which has found that only 13% of the public reveal they support the disruptions caused by Just Stop Oil, with 47% strongly opposed to the demonstrations. And also coming up later on the show, as we remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice, I'm going to be joined in the studio by a World War II veteran, as well as historian and broadcaster Tess Dunlop. And please get in touch. Do you want to appear on my show today? I want you to. I want to hear your views and opinions of the main stories of the week: Just Stop Oil, nurses' strikes, the dreadful Gavin Williamson, the UK economy. Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk for your chance to appear on the show today. But before that, the latest headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's warning there's a tough road ahead, saying difficult decisions will be needed to restore confidence and economic stability. Jeremy Hunt set to unveil his tax and spending plans next week in the autumn statement. His comments come as the latest official figures show the UK economy contracted by 0.2% between July and September. The data from the Office for National Statistics follows the Bank of England's warning last week that the UK may well be heading for a 2-year recession. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has called the latest GDP figures extremely worrying.
Today's GDP numbers are incredibly concerning. They show that the economy has shrunk in the last 3 months, and indeed they show that we are now the only major G7 economy whose economy is still smaller than it was going into the COVID pandemic. So these series of crises are problems made in Downing Street, but it is ordinary working people here in Britain who are paying the price.
The UK has marked Armistice Day with a 2-minute silence. Bells rang out across the country, including the recently restored Big Ben in London, to remember the war dead and mark the end of World War I. A service was held at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire to pay tribute to all those who've served their country. Army veteran Robert Clark told GB News he'd be remembering all those involved in the armed forces, past and present.
We're incredibly grateful, I think, for the services, the parades, the role of the royal family, for example. This is obviously the first year King Charles is going to be heading the services on Sunday. And I think a lot of the armed forces community and the veterans are welcoming, as well as reflective of the passing of Her late Majesty the Queen, the role that she had with the armed forces.
UK authorities and Coast Guards are preparing for a significant surge in small boats crossing the English Channel this weekend. Bad weather has stopped migrants from illegally reaching the coast for almost a fortnight. But GB News understands with the improving weather, crime groups from Albania are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches as early as tomorrow. It would be the first large-scale arrival since the end of last month, when just over 14,000 people arrived in 32 small boats. Elsewhere, Russia says it has completed the withdrawal of its troops from Ukraine's Kherson region. Ukrainian soldiers have been seen celebrating the retreat, waving the national flag on the reclaimed territory. Moscow says all its soldiers crossed the Dnipro River to the eastern bank early this morning. Ukrainian officials have said thousands are yet to leave, though, with it taking at least a week for them to retreat. Despite withdrawing troops from the region, the Kremlin says Kherson is still part of Russia. A prolific online paedophile who exploited children as young as 7 years old has been jailed for 26 years. Jordan Croft, who's 26, abused girls online over a 2-year period before being caught by officers from the National Crime Agency. Croft forced his victims to become his sex slaves and blackmailed them into sending photos and videos performing sexual acts on themselves and others. 24 out of his 26 victims were under the age of 18. Heathrow Airport has said it won't be limiting passenger numbers this festive season as it gears up for its biggest Christmas in 3 years. The West London Airport has had a total of 50 million passengers pass through its doors so far this year. That's almost 3/4 pre-pandemic levels. It said it won't need to impose a passenger cap as it has good plans in place ahead of the Christmas peak. And a new survey shows 60% of drivers believe the condition of local roads has deteriorated in the past year. An RAC survey of over 3,000 drivers shows only 4% say the roads in their area have improved. Some 86% say they have to steer in order to avoid potholes on several occasions whilst driving. The rise to 90% is among those who live in rural areas. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as we get it. Now, though, it's back to Andrew Pearce.
Well, welcome to the show, and let's kick off with a look at our very latest GB News People's Poll. Now, this is a scientific poll of the opinion of the people in the country at large. This week it's revealed only 13% of the public reveal they support the disruptions caused by Just Stop Oil, with 47% strongly opposed to the demonstrations. Our poll also found that more than half of those surveyed supported harsher punishment for the protesters, but older groups seem much more in favour of the increased sentences than younger groups. That's me, of course. And in the latest Westminster voting intention, support for Reform UK has hit a record high. When asked how they'd vote in a general election, 8% opted for the Richard Tice-led party, a record high level of support. In comparison to last week's People's Poll, Labour are down 5 points, from 47 to 42%. The Tories still a dreadful 21%. The Lib Dems down 1 point, from 10 to 9%. Well, let's speak to Kevin Schofield, who's political editor at Huffington Post, and joins me now. Kevin, what do you think about that? 13% only support what they're doing, 47% strongly opposed. I thought it would be more like 67% strongly opposed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, if not most people, would agree with the aims of the campaigners, but not their methods. I think that's why you're seeing the figures that you are. People don't like their lives being disrupted, as they would probably see it for no reason. So maybe the campaigners are aiming at the wrong target. And, you know, when you're campaigning on anything, you have to try and take the public with you. And these figures would suggest that the Just Stop Oil campaigners are failing to take the public with them. So they might have to possibly rethink their methods and the way that they're going about trying to achieve their aims.
They have paused the campaign today, and I'm going to be speaking to somebody from Just Stop Oil, Kevin, in a moment. But there's a picture in just about every newspaper today of 17 or so police officers on a deserted M25, deserted for hours because one solitary Just Stop Oil protester is on a gantry above the motorway. This, with the headline, "What on earth are the police doing?" We know the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has laid the law down to the police, but they simply are not, it appears, willing to take them on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it may well be a question for the police to look again at how they handle situations like this. Obviously, as I said, it is massively disruptive to people trying to go about their daily lives, getting to work, maybe going to visit family and friends. So you can understand why people get frustrated by this type of thing, and also wondering why the police are policing it in the way that they do. I think different forces have different approaches to dealing with these protests. But yeah, you're right. The Home Secretary has been pretty clear with the police as to how she believes, anyway, that they should be approaching these types of situations. So it may well be something again that the police might want to have a rethink as to come up with the best way to approach it.
And haven't the Home Office beefed up the laws, Kevin, so that the police can do just that? And we know they are in breach of highway laws.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it does make you wonder precisely why the police are choosing to deal with it the way that they are. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking along Victoria Street in London near Parliament, and Just Stop Oil protesters were sitting down in the middle of the road. They moved voluntarily, really, after a few minutes before things got too heated. Obviously, there was a little bit of frustration from pedestrians and from motorists, but the police were there, really not being heavy-handed, just speaking to the protesters. And as I say, after a few minutes, they moved on, which seemed to me a pretty sensible way. They'd made their protest. There was a minimum of disruption, and people could go about their lives again. So maybe that might be a way to approach these things in future.
Has Suella Braverman, Kevin, made her job? Is she unsackable now, the Home Secretary? Because we know she was fired by Liz Truss, had a big barney over immigration. She's raised the ante dramatically on migrants. She's now raising the ante dramatically on the wretched Just Stop Oil protesters. It's music to the ears of Tory MPs. I think it's music to the ears of a lot of people watching this programme today. Is she unsackable?
I don't think anyone, any minister is unsackable. I mean, we saw what happened to Gavin Williamson, whether you believe he was sacked or resigned. No, this was someone who was a very close ally of Rishi Sunak and was gone as soon as the heat became too much. So, I mean, at the moment, Suella Braverman is in a much stronger position than she was a couple of weeks ago, when it looked as though she would be the first departure from Rishi Sunak's cabinet. But again, she will be judged on results. And, you know, as you say, she set the bar pretty high when it comes to the migrant crossings and the small boats coming across the channel. Successive Home Secretaries have said that they would deal with this problem and haven't. So again, I think that is how she will be judged. I think Rishi Sunak will want to keep her there as long as possible, because having lost Gavin Williamson, he doesn't want to lose another member of his cabinet so soon after becoming Prime Minister. But again, as I say, she will be judged on results. I wouldn't say that she's unsackable.
Just finally, not much of a bounce for Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister. The Tories trailing at 21% in that GB News poll. Labour down a bit, but still a huge lead. Will they be disappointed in Number 10 about that?
I think they will be, yeah. That to me was the main thing that leapt out from that poll. The fact that, you know, there's been no bounce to speak of really since Rishi Sunak came in. You would have thought that just by dint of the fact that he's not Liz Truss, that might have helped the Conservatives get a bit more of a bump in the polls. But yeah, I mean, to be 20 points or more than 20 points behind Labour at this stage is pretty underwhelming. And that is before we come to the autumn statement next week, in which we're fully expecting the Chancellor to announce tax rises and deep spending cuts. So that's not designed to make the Conservatives any more popular. So if they're bumping along at 21% now, before all this bad news comes in, it does make you wonder how on earth Rishi Sunak's going to be able to advance the party in advance of the next general election.
Indeed, that's Kevin Schofield, political editor at the Huffington Post. Thanks for joining me. Now, still with me in the studio is Stephen Pound.
Not a great fan of Just Stop Oil.
You're not?
No, I mean, I think they're making a fundamental mistake here.
Can't bear them.
Yeah, no, nobody knows what Just Stop Oil means. This is the difficulty. If they actually had a specific aim, a specific target, so now suppose they talk about home insulation. There's not an MP in the country who wouldn't listen to somebody coming to her or his surgery and say, we want to do home insulation. You know, but instead of which, they come up with this specious, vacuous nonsense about what the hell does Just Stop Oil actually mean?
The failure of the police to act. I was just looking here in the Mail. Norman Brennan used to be a police officer. Said in 1981, when he was a 22-year-old police officer with the British Transport Police, on the beat at Waterloo Station, one afternoon he saw two activists protesting about nuclear weapons at Green and Common. They chained themselves to a military helicopter. So the police officers got chain cutters, cut through the chains, took them to the police station, and they were banged up.
I thought you were going to say they waited till the helicopter took off, but I mean that's sensible and that's logical.
Policing, but why don't we do that anymore? Because the policing's gone woke.
Well, I don't think all policing's gone woke. There's a tiny bit unfair to the police service, but I think the interesting thing about Just Stop Oil is that they're basically saying let's have nuclear, because if you actually want to have clean power, nuclear is the answer. Be like Finland and just say we're going to build nuclear power stations. So Just Stop Oil, let's build nuclear. That's really what they're talking about. But look, I was talking to a police officer yesterday. yesterday, actually in the viaduct down my local pub, and he said, if you're talking about clambering up onto a gantry and then somebody wrestling with a person to...
No, I'm not talking about that.
Well, no, that is difficult.
Yeah, no, what you do is you stop the traffic and you get a water cannon and you aim the water cannon, you give them a choice, you get the fire brigade to put underneath the sort of a system where they catch them, a net. They have a choice, they climb down or they're knocked down by the water cannon. What's wrong with that?
You're such a wimp. A safety net. I can't believe that you're going to give them a safety net.
I'm going to give them a safety net. That would end the protest and we won't have this extraordinary picture on the front page of the Mail today. What's the point of these police? Look at this picture. What is the point of these police? 4 hours that road was closed because one wretched demonstrator's up on the gantry above. That's what you needed. A water cannon would have done it.
If you fired a water cannon, you could easily kill a person. And if
then they'd come down.
Yeah.
But Stephen,
well, they'd come down. They'd come down in a box. But I don't think we're ready for that.
You have a safety net.
Yeah.
But the other day, a police officer was injured because of avoiding action on a motorway where there was a Just Stop Oil protest. What's going to happen is someone's going to die. It's not going to be one of them.
I agree. I think we look at it the other way around. Why does the traffic stop? Because one person is up on the gantry. Surely, if that person, there's a risk of that person falling into the road, fine, block that stream off, but have the rest of the lanes open. I don't see why on earth the whole of the M25, 5, 6, 7 lanes should be blocked. Because
if you keep the traffic going and this protester falls off while the traffic is flowing, it could be other people getting killed and injured.
No, what you do, the one underneath the protester, you close that lane.
Okay.
But the ones on either side, don't forget, he can't actually dart about because he's glued to the flipping gantry.
Interesting. Currently today, Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, he's hosting the British-Irish Council Summit today in Blackpool. Now, it's the first time the Conservatives have been at this for 17 years. You were in the Northern... You held the Northern Ireland beat for 9 years for the party.
But I was
Did you chair the Northern Ireland Select Committee?
No, I was the number 2 on that.
Number 2. This is a fairly dry organisation, but the problem with Northern Ireland is Boris Johnson said he got Brexit done. He hasn't really, because Northern Ireland is effectively still in the European Union.
No, not remotely. I mean, not exactly, but I take your point. The thing about this council is it's not just the Republic of Ireland, it's not just the Taoiseach Micheál Martin and our Prime Minister. It's also the Isle of Man, the Channel Islands. It's a very strange organisation. But the 2 people who should be there aren't there. And they are the First Minister of Northern Ireland and the Leader of the Assembly. Because there's nobody there representing Northern Ireland. So we're talking about this situation which actually affects them. There's no voice there. And I think that's the real problem. And I'd be interested to see what Michael Gove comes up with.
Of course, that explains why he's there, because people think, what's the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary doing, chairing a meeting like that? Part of his brief, of course, also is to ensure the union stays together, the glue of the union. People always think about the union, about Scotland, because Nicola Sturgeon, she wakes up every day thinking, how can she get independence? But Northern Ireland could be the part which breaks away first because of the clamour increasingly in the south.
Very simply, there have been 3 major pieces of legislation affecting Northern Ireland. 3, there's the Gladstone one, the Asquith one, and obviously, the Lloyd George in the 1920s. Each piece of legislation envisaged a temporary separation of 6 of the 9 counties of Northern Ireland, of Ulster, as it were, and then they would rejoin the whole island. Because the border, if you actually look at it from Donegal to Dundalk, it's 303, 304 miles, so as long as London to Newcastle. Nobody knows where the border is. Sometimes it crosses into Northern Ireland. There's water, there's little boreens, little bridges. It's an impossible situation. And I think, I can't remember who it was, I think Conor Murphy said, we do have a border on the island of Ireland. It's called the beach. And that's the reality. So the problem is that you can't tinker around with it. You can't talk about having a customs union in the middle of the sea. Ultimately, if we're going to actually have Irish-UK trade, which is huge at that, then it's either got to be on EU terms or it's not going to cross the border at all.
Well, it can't be on EU terms because that's unacceptable.
But it's unacceptable. But
do you accept, even though you're as an arch Remainer, that the European Union is effectively subjecting that part of the European Union to a punishment beating in terms of how many checks are being imposed on that border? Far more than any other part of the European Union. They don't need to do that.
I entirely disagree with you. I remember Guy de Hofstadt, when we were actually talking about on the border, he said, he was the European Commissioner at the time, and he said, I'm from Belgium, I understand surrealism. This is a ridiculous situation where the European Union have actually bent over backwards to accommodate this, because any other part of the European Union, there was no way that they would allow self-certification of dairy goods to cross the border. There's no way they would do it. Now, you could say we have good veterinary standards within GB, and I think we do have But any other country, imagine if, Romania or somebody said, trust us, we're going to export our goods across the border. So ultimately, the real problem is that you've got two diverging issues here. The Sinn Féin won the majority in the last, and they will probably win the majority again.
Sure they will.
I mean, there's obviously situations with, Naomi and the other groups there, but ultimately, the prospect of Michelle O'Neill being the First Minister is absolutely, utterly toxic to the DUP. They can't accept that. So to a certain extent, they don't want to see this resolved. Because if this was resolved and there were elections and they go back into Stormont and Michelle O'Neill is the First Minister, and Conor Murphy and people like that are in there, it's going to be very, very difficult for them. So, look, either we route everything through the Republic of Ireland with a border on there, with a proper border, which is... is that going to work? Is it possible? If you have a border, you're going to have to actually enforce the border. You're going to have border control posts. If you have a border control post, they're going to be targets. If they're targets, you've got to put a police officer to guard it. The day we in GB, put uniformed troops on that border...
It's back to the bad old days.
Absolutely. I'm glad you see that. A lot of people don't see that.
Yeah, this is Stephen Powell with me here in GB News. He's the former Labour MP. He's with me for a little longer. Now, but I want to talk to you about a prolific online paedophile who exploited children as young as 7 years old. He's been jailed for 26 years. Jordan Croft, who is 26, abused girls online over a 2-year period. He was caught by officers from the National Crime Agency. Croft is an IT worker from Worthing in West Sussex. He forced his victims, horrific this, to become his sex slaves and blackmailed them into sending photos and videos performing sexual and other degrading acts on themselves and others. 24 out of his 26 victims were under the age of 18. The senior investigating officers reacted to the sentencing.
It just shows the increase in offenders like him who use the internet, the dark web, encryption to target not one or two children, but hundreds of children. In this case, we have 26 victims.
26 victims. I can speak now to online safety campaigner Lauren Lefebvre, whose son Breck was murdered after being groomed online. Good afternoon to you.
Hello.
It's so depressing for you to hear yet another the paedophile's been arrested, locked up, but it's going on. And do you get any sense that the authorities have got a grip on this?
Well, I think what really strikes me is the fact that it was going on for, over 2 years or almost 2 years, and he wasn't caught out until he hurt that many children. Over 5,000 people he had been interacting with on just one platform with 20 different profiles. He needs to be caught a lot sooner than what has happened in next case scenarios, because there are more predators out there. There are more children that won't have the education to recognize that they're being groomed and manipulated and abused. So I think I'm so glad he's off the streets now, but I think about all of those victims, and they will have a lot of work to feel like they haven't been damaged in some way. And yet they're not, they weren't, but they became that way because of this predator. And it saddens me to think of all of those girls and young women who will have this with them. And I hope they get the help and support they need.
Lauren, can you bear to tell us what happened to your son, Breck?
Well, I mean, Breck was groomed online through gaming with friends from school. And the thing was, I recognized that there was someone that wasn't from his school friendship group. And the boys just didn't feel that this predator was a danger. They didn't understand that people can lie about who they are, pretend to be someone else. And unfortunately, they were all being groomed and manipulated. And so after Breck was lured to the predator's flat and sadly killed, I realized after I learned more about the case through the police investigation that there were a lot of mistakes made and a lot of missing links within education. So that was when I decided I had to set up the charity Breck Foundation so that we would learn lessons that would help protect children in future. So one of the things that frustrates me about this story is, in my heart of hearts, I believe that if we had better education within every school and within the curriculum, using Breck's real life story, other children's real life stories, we could help young people understand the behaviors of these predators so that they could report sooner, they could stand up to the predators, they could talk to their parents and their schools about it, that they could actually not think that they've done something wrong, but they would be able to be proactive and empowered to look after each other. All we need is the funding. All we need is the right amount of funding to be able to reach every child at every school, because whether they're being groomed for sexual exploitation or running drugs with county lines or any other reason that these monsters prey on children, once they learn those basic signs of grooming, they are better able to protect themselves online and face-to-face as well.
OK, well, thanks so much for joining us. It's Lauren Lefebvre, whose son Breck was murdered after being groomed online. You're watching Andrew Pierce here on GB News. Coming up, I'm going to be joined in the studio by a former Republican congressional candidate to talk about the US midterm results and what this all means, especially to Donald Trump. Before that, let's take a short break.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Now, it's been a full 2 days since Election Day, and control of Congress still hangs in the balance. Control of the Senate is still too close to call, with results in 3 states outstanding. Election officials have said voters may be waiting until next week to find out the outcome. In Georgia, neither Senate candidate reached the required threshold of 50%, meaning the state will have a runoff election in December. And in Arizona and Nevada, the counting continues. Why is it taking so long? Well, the big picture, of course, is that the counts take extra time in races that are very, very close. Currently, the Republicans are short of a majority in the House of Representatives with 211 seats, the Democrats on 193. But the party needs 218 to control the chamber. Joining me now in the studio is, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Dalia Al-Akidi, a former Republican congressional candidate, and Emma Burnell, no stranger to GB News, journalist and political consultant. How did I do with your surname?
Absolutely right.
Right. It'll probably all go horribly wrong after this, Dalia. Dalia,
yes.
You're a former Republican congressional candidate. You're a Republican through and through. Your reaction to the results, and what is Trump going to do on Tuesday when the big announcement's coming?
Well, actually, I look at it as the glass half full.
It was great for the Republicans, and it's more important for the Republicans right now to get the majority in the House of Representatives because it's where they vote for the spending. And Republicans have so many problems with the spending policies from the White House. So this is one thing. Number two is it showed quite clear that former President Donald Trump has no chance in maybe being the Republican candidate or even win the next elections in 2024. The thing is, if we see that President Trump endorsed almost 303 Republican candidates. Look at them. Where are they? They're gone. The streets have spoken and Republicans have spoken that we are not ready to go back. Donald Trump is the history. Now we have a future.
The future. Now, is the future in Florida, in the telegenic, handsome, young, dashing Ron DeSantis, very beautiful wife, nice young kids? Is he the future? Because he had a huge victory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're all excited about it. Actually, I tweeted yesterday that he has my full support and I will work to support him in 2024. The reason why, number one, is we're tired of old people. I mean, with all due respect, I'm not saying that old people, but we're tired of it. We need new blood. We need...
Biden is 79. What is Trump? 75, 76?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the time for them to retire.
Yes.
We need the new blood. We need people that think with that generation, understands what we're facing and understands what the new generations are facing.
Is there a silver lining also in the results for the Republicans in the fact that they didn't do as well as they were supposed to? Trump maybe it's over. I hope it is, personally, because I think he's a nightmare. But do the Democrats then think, oh, Biden didn't do so badly, we have to soldier on with a man who clearly is struggling with his cognitive capacities, age 79, confusing his son's death in the Iraq War with the fact actually he died 5 or 6 years ago, very tragically, with cancer?
I mean, he failed in so many ways, especially when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, starting with Afghanistan, and I'm not going to say anymore. I believe so. Even the Democrats are not looking for Biden. They don't trust Biden that much. They don't trust Kamala Harris. Not even 1%.
She sank without trace.
Okay,
We never
absolutely.
hear from her.
I mean, even if she talked to her, you think that you're in
woman vice president, and there's nowhere to be seen. Is she that bad?
Absolutely. I mean, she could be a first grader or a teacher to teach. Like, this is Russia. This is Ukraine. Ukraine is good. And can you believe that? And she was talking to Europeans. The thing is, I believe that Trump became a liability on the Republican, the GOP in general. And I truly believe, and I hope that whoever is around him would tell him that enough is enough, go retire. The good news is, no more Nancy Pelosi.
Who's the speaker, the Democratic
Absolutely.
speaker? She goes to?
We'll see. Oh, she goes to be a member if she wants to. Again, she needs to retire.
All right, that's Dalia Al-Kidi. We're going to carry on with that debate, but the time is now coming up to 3:30. We'll be remembering also those who made the ultimate sacrifice. I'm going to be joined by the World War II veteran Patricia Outram and historian Tess Dunlop. She's very special, that veteran. She's 99 and she played a blinder in the Second World War. But first, it's your news update.
Good afternoon, it's 1:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's warning there's a tough road ahead, saying difficult decisions will be needed to restore confidence and economic stability. Jeremy Hunt set to unveil his tax and spending plans next week in the autumn statement. His comments come as the latest official figures show the UK economy contracted by 0.2% between July and September. The data from the Office for National Statistics follows the Bank of England's warning last week that the UK may be heading for a 2-year recession. The UK has marked Armistice Day with a 2-minute silence remembering the war dead. A service was held at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire to pay tribute to those who've served their country. Bells rang out across the nation, including the recently restored Big Ben in London, to mark the end of World War I. UK authorities and coastguards are preparing for a significant surge in small boats crossing the English Channel this weekend. Bad weather has stopped migrants from illegally reaching the coast for almost a fortnight. But GB News understands, with the improving weather, crime groups from Albania are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches as early as tomorrow. And Heathrow Airport says it won't be limiting passenger numbers this festive season as it gears up for its biggest Christmas in 3 years. The West London airport's had 50 million passengers pass through its doors so far this year, almost 75% of pre-pandemic levels. Heathrow says a passenger cap won't be needed as it has a good plan in place ahead of the Christmas peak. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1784 and €1.1428. The price of gold is £1,494 and 77 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,350 points.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update. Another blustery but very mild day out there. Most places having a dry day, but we've seen some very heavy rain over the past 36 hours over northwestern parts of Scotland, and this weather front is still providing some rain, although it is going to push its way slowly southwards. It's squeezing the isobars together, hence why it is so blustery, but that air is coming up from the southwest, so it is very mild, particularly gusty over southeastern Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. That rain persisting across the northwest of Scotland as well. It's been very wet for Skye and Lewis in particular, and that rain edging into Northern Ireland through the afternoon. For most of England and Wales, dry, some sunny spells, particularly across northeast England, but most just staying cloudy, but it is very, very mild. We'll see a bit more of that rain trickling south through the central belt into southern Scotland, clearing from Northern Ireland and northern Scotland, perhaps a little bit coming into Cumbria for a time through the night, but again, much of the south dry. Could turn quite misty. A few fog patches are possible as we head into Saturday morning. Won't be quite as mild as the night just gone, but still temperatures likely to stay in double figures in many areas. A misty, murky start then to the weekend, particularly over central and eastern parts of England. Could be some dense fog on some of the higher routes in particular. That will slowly clear. At the same time, the rain will slowly work away to the north, so turning dry for Northern Ireland and southern Scotland, and eventually brightening up across parts of northern Scotland too. With some sunny spells in the south, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 Celsius. And the winds will be lighter tomorrow compared to today. Lighter winds and clearer skies means mist and fog is likely to return on Saturday night and into Sunday morning, particularly over eastern areas. So it could be a foggy start to Sunday here. Generally, again, another dry day. Quite a lot of cloud around, but some sunny spells developing. And again, it will be very mild.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me. Noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Armistice Day, and it's a great treat for me to have in the studio Pat Outram, who is a magnificent 99, who served with, as part of the Bletchley Park operation. You were in the Y station, Pat, intercepting the Enigma code. You were part of that team which broke the Enigma code, which effectively speeded up the end of the Second World War.
Well, I think we did, and I was very lucky because we lived right in the country in Lancashire, but it was my grandfather's house, and he had an Austrian cook, and she was a refugee from Vienna, and she didn't speak English when she arrived, so spending my evenings with Mrs. Getzel, I did acquire conversational German, as we'd call it now.
Right. So you were able to, because you had to be able to intercept the signals, you had to be familiar with German. You had to sign the Official Secrets Act?
Oh, certainly.
And were you aware, Pat, working with those women in Y Station, how significant it was, what you were doing?
I probably didn't fully recognise it because I was still a teenager. And I was delighted that I could contribute something at my age to the war. I think sort of during the war, I did realise more and more that we were not exactly important, but quite a useful part of the intelligence services.
She's being very modest here. I'm joined with Dr. Tessa Dunlop, who wrote that book, Bletchley Girls. How significant were people like Pat?
Oh, hugely. And of course, there was a desperate shortage, wasn't there, Pat, of German speakers. I don't think one member of the British cabinet could speak German. So we were having to find alternative means. Any men who could speak German weren't necessarily in the country. So Pat was this vital resource. And I think even today, you remember your German alphabet for writing down those Enigma encrypted codes, don't you?
Oh, I do, yes. And what they needed, of course, was conversational German, because you never knew what would come up.
You can do your Caesar, Bertha. How does it go?
What, the one that starts Anton, Bertha, Caesar, Dora, Emil, Fritz, Gustav, and so on.
And what at night you would live in houses with the other girls from Camp Y? Did you talk about your work, or did you talk about anything else but your work?
I think we, if there was anything to talk about, would talk to each other about it. Of course, we didn't say a word outside our stations. We didn't tell our families.
I was going to ask, did your parents know what you were doing?
They didn't. In fact, my father couldn't really, because he was overseas and then a prisoner of war. My mother was extremely discreet. She was an ARP warden at home. And they never asked, and I didn't tell them or anybody.
It transformed your life in many ways, but also Pat just has this extraordinary cachet of anecdotes. She's also written her own book, code-breaking sisters. Her sister Jean also signed the Official Secrets Act. I think they must be the last two sisters alive who served in the Second World War who signed that act. But, for instance, do you remember in the preparations for the D-Day landings? Tell us about the time you met Churchill coming over the brow of the hill with Montgomery.
Yes, this was, as Tessa says, I think the spring before D-Day, and I was stationed down between Dover and Folkestone in a listening station on top of the cliffs called Abbott's Cliff. And I'd been on watch, as we called it, in the early hours of the morning, came out about 8 o'clock, and coming up this path to our very remote little station was a whole bunch of people. And to my astonishment, Monty and the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, in the front of these army officers. And you were supposed to salute those kind of people in the Wrens, which I was in, but only when wearing a hat. Well, if you'd been on watch all night in a listening place, you were certainly not wearing a hat. So I did the only thing possible and waved at them all and said, "Good morning, everybody." And they all waved back and said, "Good morning." And they went on to the edge of the cliff. I thought, what are they doing? And they looked across because you could see Cap Grine very closely.
Right. You think they were looking to see, ready for the invasion?
They wanted to be seen.
Ah.
Because it was a decoy. It was
That's right.
Because the invasion was going to be much further west.
Yeah. Clever.
And it would be reported back that Churchill had been down at Dover.
How very clever. And you were part of the Great Deception. Now, of course, isn't your friend Pat in a rather remarkable book because of her connection with George VI?
Well, I tell you what, Pat, who's lived virtually 100 years, if you're an oral historian like me, not Pat, I'm just going to do a project on Elizabeth and Philip. Do you have an anecdote about the late Queen? And Pat went, you'll tell me this wonderful story. So after the war, Pat, how many universities did you attend, Pat?
Oh, I must have been to, well, I went to St Andrews University. They gave me a research fellowship.
And then Oxford?
To Oxford.
And then?
To Harvard Graduate
School.
So
3 universities. So her pushy aunt wants her to be presented at court, which had gone a bit out of fashion.
As a debutante?
As a debutante.
Right.
And you felt you were perhaps a little bit too mature to be presented at court, but along you went, didn't you, biddable as you were with your sister, and you were one of the sort of last cohort of people who met the King, and you have quite distinct memories of that time, don't you?
Well, I do, because I wouldn't have gone, but if your name has been sent in and it's royalty, you absolutely have to go, and only to sort of curtsy to the King and Queen. The King was looking very pale, very tired.
And he had a lot of makeup on, didn't he?
He did. He had makeup and sat on a chair at one side. And but the Queen, of course, was in very good form. And after waiting some time and the band played music, we did our curtsy. You have to back out without turning your back on royalty. That's more difficult than you might think.
Yeah, and I found this quite interesting because, of course, at the time everyone was in denial about how ill the King was. Pat goes in and immediately spots, well, he's wearing makeup and he looks terrible. Yeah. So she cameo, if I may say, in Elizabeth.
I was just about to say, come on, here's the plug for the book.
Yes, I've given it to Pat. It's not for you, Andrew, sorry.
Elizabeth and Philip, which is a great book. And Pat, that book is next to that rather remarkable badge on your jacket here on the right, which is, I think, the highest military honour from the French government.
It is. It's the Légion d'honneur military, and very generous of the French government. I mean, I did a little bit towards helping the French, but...
More than a little bit, perhaps.
Well,
and here we have King George. These are her service medals from World War II. This is the real deal.
Yeah. Pat, you are what personifies Armistice Day. You are a magnificent lady. It's been a great honour to meet you. It's very humbling. And you're looking very good, may I say, for your very mature years. She's written her own book, actually. It's called, what's it called?
Code Breaking
Sisters.
Her and her sister Jean Outram.
Written by Pat Outram, and of course Tessa's written her own book, Code Breaking Sisters, and of course Elizabeth and Philip. Timely, perfect timing.
We keep busy. She keeps working, isn't it, Pat? You're always busy and engaged. That's the secret to a long life. Retain ambition. And look at this wonderful hair.
Oh, well, we're tough old things.
You were tough old things, and we're very glad you were tough old things, because it was tough old things like you that made sure we won the war. Well, that's it from Pat and lovely Tessa coming to see me. There have been events taking place all over the country to mark Armistice Day, but we're now going to go to Dougie Beattie, who is in Northern Ireland.
Well, good afternoon, Andrea, and it is. I've been sitting across between lives here and looking just in the restaurant here, looking into the cenotaph, and it's amazing actually how many different generations are coming in here and taking photographs and taking time looking at the little crosses that are in the ground here, and of course each one of those represents a life. Why does Remembrance Day mean so much to Northern Ireland? Well, traditionally, for some strange reason, there is more armed forces come from here to go to serve the Crown per head than anywhere else in the UK. They are extremely loyal here and they do serve. I mean, you just have to look, the Second World War. This is the First, the Second World War, the Falklands, conflicts all around the world, and including that in Northern Ireland. And of course, even if we are watching the SAS Heroes, we will realise that Paddy Blair Main, of course, came from outside here in Newtownards. But the British forces here and police took a very hard battering from the IRA during the 70s and 80s. And during that Good Friday Agreement, the IRA were giving letters of comfort so as they didn't have to come back to court, only if new information was found that was undisputable, while British forces have been brought back time and time again. And it has become quite a thorn in the side of the government. The forces here, security forces, ex-soldiers, very angry about what has gone on and how they haven't been protected and continue to be brought back. And of course, the biggest one of those was Dennis Hutchings, who was buried last year on Armistice Day, and of course he died while standing trial in Northern Ireland, and that has been a bone of contention with veterans who were promised legislation that would stop. And I spoke to Paul Young, the spokesman for the Veterans Association.
Yes, well, last year was probably one of the most disgraceful episodes in the legal history of Northern Ireland as far as veterans are concerned, because this time last year we were burying Dennis Hutchings. He was the first soldier to be prosecuted under the legacy witch hunts. Unfortunately, Dennis, he died before he could finish his trial through serious illnesses. He was denied the right to be found not guilty. And that's why we've been protesting for people like Dennis and all this legacy witch hunts that's been going on, which has been taking our soldiers and security forces to court rather than those that committed the most horrendous human rights abuses against the public of Northern Ireland.
Well, the public of Northern Ireland did horrendous human rights abuse. One of those was 35 years ago, the Remembrance Day service in Enniskillen. A bomb ripped through it. It killed 12, injured 63. And those terrorists are not there to answer for that, but the British forces are. Now, that legislation came out of the Commons, went into the House of Lords. It is being read in the House of Lords, hopefully in the next month, and then veterans hope that that is being put back again. It's basically a statute of limitations. People are calling it an amnesty. It's definitely not. It is a statute of limitations, and veterans here hope that by February that it will be in law. So with that, it's back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Dougie. Thanks for that. Now let's go back into the studio. I've got with me in the studio Emma Burnell, journalist and playwright. Emma, you were listening to that really remarkable lady, Pat Outram, with Tessa Dunlop.
Wasn't she incredible? I was there was such a big lump in my throat. It was just wonderful to hear, and it just made me think about the family members of mine who served in the war, and it's really important that we keep remembering those stories.
It really is, and even though the number of people we see it at the cenotaph on Sunday, when the King leads the nation, there'll be fewer and fewer from the Second World War. But of course, it does represent the Falklands War and the Iraq War. How important it is we continue to remember. Absolutely, completely. And yes, there are fewer veterans from the Second World War still alive. Sadly, I've lost all of my grandparents. Both of my grandfathers served in different capacities. In the Second World War? In the Second World War. What did they do? So Grandad was just in the Army Corps, and he was there on D-Day. That's my dad's dad. My mum's dad, I can't tell you exactly what he did, because much like Pat, he signed the Official Secrets Act. He worked at the Admiralty. What I can tell you is that Grandpa was an eminent statistician. And became a very well-known, amongst statisticians, I'm not saying he's a household name, but he clearly did a lot of similar things, I think, probably to Pat, in terms of the kind of work that he was working on. My dad's dad lost his leg in the Battle of the Somme in the First World War, and his party trick was to pull the trouser leg up and get his grandchildren to knock on the leg, which was pink. But get him to talk about it. No. Well, Grandpa never, ever talks about his time at the Admiralty, ever. And he was a wonderful raconteur with stories of all sorts. So he would have done had he, I imagine. But I think it was a very, very difficult time. And some veterans do prefer not to talk about it, which has to be respected too. It is Armistice Day. I was talking earlier to Stephen Pound, the former Labour MP, about the SNP, member of the Scottish Parliament, who thought it was appropriate to wear not just a white poppy, but to have emblazoned in the white poppy the independence symbol. She's had some flack about that, but doesn't resolve from it. I think it's insulting, actually. What's your view on the white poppy? I've quite often worn both a white and a red poppy. And for me, the white poppy stands for the people who are victims of war beyond those who serve. So I think that remembering those victims alongside those who serve is important. But for me, so I'm on the left, and my mother is a pacifist, in fact. My father isn't. So this is a conversation I've had in my family, things I've had to think about for a long time, and I'm not a pacifist. I do believe sometimes that the combat is necessary. I am, for example, very supportive of the Ukrainian side at the moment in that war, and they didn't have a choice. So, of course, they have to fight and fight well, and we hope they win. So, given that I'm neither a pacifist nor a soldier, I think it's important for someone like me to respect our veterans too, which is why I do wear the red poppy. Glad to hear that. Thought we might have been falling out. Time and a place. We've got time. Yeah, but I also think Armistice Day is not the day to wear the white poppy. I mean, I think if you're remembering all victims of war, I think wearing it alongside the red poppy is one thing. I think on its own, and particularly tying it to Scottish independence, that's deeply weird to me. Deeply weird. Emma Burnell's going to stay with me. She's a journalist and playwright. Your views on everything we're talking about today on the Just Stop Oil protesters. Keith says, I'd like to ask these protesters if they drive cars or use public transport or go on holiday, and do their parents do the same? I believe a lot of them are simply hypocrites. Understatement. And on nurses, Geraldine from Northern Ireland says, unlike England, Northern Ireland pays the tuition fees of trainee nurses quite, and gives them a bursary of £5,000 per year. But it hasn't helped the staff shortages. Very few trained nurses remain in the profession, many going to specialist management roles where the real money is. Well, thank you for your views. Keep them coming. Email them into gbnews@gbnews.uk. You're watching Andrew Pearce here on GB News. Plenty more to come, still in the final hour of the programme. So, of course, we don't want you to go anywhere. Before that, though, we're going to go to a short break.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales,
and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Andrew Pearce here on GB News, bringing you all the latest of the big stories from this week. Throughout the next hour, I'm going to be joined by the journalist and playwright Emma Burnell. Coming up, a surge of small boats crossing the Channel is expected this weekend after a spell of bad weather has caused them to be halted for nearly 2 weeks. Russia's defence ministry says they've completed the withdrawal from the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. All Russian soldiers were moved across the river to the eastern bank early this morning. We're also going to be bringing you the results of our latest People's Poll, which has found that only 13% of the public revealed they support the disruptions caused by Just Stop Oil. And please do get in touch if you want to appear on my show today. I want to hear your views and your opinions of the main stories of the week. Just Stop Oil, nurses, strikes. Get in touch at gbviews@gbnews.uk for your chance to appear today. But before that, the latest news.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's warning there's a tough road ahead, saying difficult decisions will be needed to restore confidence and economic stability. Jeremy Hunt's set to unveil his tax and spending plans next week in the autumn statement. His comments come as the latest official figures show the UK economy contracted by 0.2% between July and September. The data from the Office for National Statistics follows the Bank of England's warning last week that the UK may well be heading for a 2-year recession. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has called the latest GDP figures extremely worrying.
Today's GDP numbers are incredibly concerning. They show that the economy has shrunk in the last 3 months, and indeed they show that we are now the only major G7 economy whose economy is still smaller than it was going into the COVID pandemic. So these series of crises are problems made in Downing Street, but it is ordinary working people here in Britain who are paying the price.
The UK has marked Armistice Day with a 2-minute silence. Bells rang out across the country, including the recently restored Big Ben in London, to remember the war dead and mark the end of World War I. A service was held at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire to pay tribute to all those who've served their country. Army veteran Robert Clark told GB News he'd be remembering all those involved in the armed forces, past and present.
We're incredibly grateful, I think, for the services, the parades, the role of the royal family, for example. This is obviously the first year King Charles is going to be heading the services on Sunday. And I think a lot of the armed forces community and the veterans are welcoming, as well as reflective of the passing of Her late Majesty the Queen, the role that she had with the armed forces.
UK authorities and coastguards are preparing for a significant surge in small boats crossing the English Channel this weekend. Bad weather stopped migrants from illegally reaching the coast for almost a fortnight. But GB News understands with the improving weather, crime groups from Albania are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches tomorrow morning. It'd be the first large-scale arrival since the end of last month, when just over 14,000 people arrived in 32 small boats. Ukraine says it's in the final stages of reclaiming the city of Kherson from Russia. Ukrainian soldiers have been celebrating the retreat of Russian troops, waving the national flag in the region's capital. Russia says the withdrawal is complete. Its soldiers crossed the Dnipro River to the eastern bank this morning, with reports many of them drowned. Despite the retreat, the Kremlin claims Kherson is still part of Russia. A prolific online paedophile who exploited children as young as 7 years old has been jailed for 26 years. Jordan Croft, who's 26, abused girls online over a 2-year period before being caught by officers from the National Crime Agency. Croft forced his victims to become his sex slaves and blackmailed them into sending photos and videos performing sexual acts on themselves and others. 24 of his 26 victims were under the age of 18. Just Stop Oil has suspended its protest on the M25. The climate demonstrators say the pause will allow the government to do what they call the right thing. They want the government to stop new licences to the exploration of oil and other fossil fuels in the UK. The environmental group held up the M25 for 4 out of 5 days this week, causing disruption for motorists and leading to multiple arrests. A think tank is warning nurseries will be forced into raising their prices or closing because of a drop in funding in early years education. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says government spending on free childcare in England is set to fall by 8% over the next 2 years, while the budget's set to rise to £3.75 billion a year. It says the increase will be partially wiped out by soaring inflation. And Heathrow Airport has said it won't be limiting passenger numbers this festive season as it gears up for its biggest Christmas in 3 years. The West London Airport's had 50 million passengers pass through its doors so far this year, almost 75% of pre-pandemic levels. Heathrow says a passenger cap won't be needed as a good plan is in place ahead of the Christmas peak. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew.
So the UK authorities and maritime agencies are bracing for what they call a significant surge in small boat crossings this weekend after bad weather halted arrivals for almost a fortnight. Sources have told GB News that Kurdish gangmasters, in league with Albanian organised crime groups, are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches when weather conditions improve early on Saturday morning. Let's talk to GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White now. Mark, my heart absolutely sinks. We've had a 2-week respite. If they know this is going to happen, if they know who the gangs are, why is it going to happen? Why haven't they taken out these gangs?
Well, we're told that the French are trying, but there is a significant coastline there in northwest France.
What is it, 200 miles or something?
Yeah, I mean, and more than that, when you actually then take into account the dunes where they can hide these boats before blowing them up and taking them into the water. And the fact is, we've been told that French authorities have slashed 1,000 of these small boats and they've stopped many thousands of people coming across. However, that doesn't really go to the truth of what's happening, because those same people that are being prevented one day from going across just regroup and then they get across eventually anyway. And for the people smugglers, it's such a lucrative endeavour that they are going to try. They've got a huge supply of these small, flimsy, made-to-order vessels anyway. And when you consider that they're charging about 3,000 a trip, 40 on a boat, is very significant profit that they're making for each boat. And then when you get busy days, up to 30 boats crossing in a single day, it's such an attractive proposition for criminal gangs to want to be involved in this trade that actually trying to combat them is very, very difficult indeed.
Where are they operating from? Are they operating from France or other countries? And if the authorities know who they are, we keep being told they are, I don't understand why they haven't smashed them.
It's a multi-country endeavour that's underway. Criminal organisations, lots of Albanians involved in this. In terms of the gang masters, those who are involved in ushering everyone onto the vessels, preparing the vessels and getting them out into the sea, that's still really largely in the control of the Kurdish crime gangs. But increasingly, they're working in league with the Albanian criminal gangs who are advertising, and they've put out more of these TikTok videos and on other social media outlets, encouraging people from Albania to come to northwestern France for this weekend in particular. As you say, it's been 2 weekends when we've not had any crossings, purely down to the weather. 31st of October was the last time we had one boat that came across in bad weather, managed to make it across. And the weekend just before that, of course, was the big weekend where 1,500 crossed, and it caused so much trouble down at Manston, down at that airbase in Kent, where it's supposed to, Andrew, just be a processing centre where you're only held for 24 hours and then farmed out, controversially, of course, to hundreds of hotels all around the country. Well, that slowed down because of the bottleneck that is the processing centre at Manston. And it's going to be a real tester to see whether Manston is able to cope in the next few days with more boats coming across. We're told that at Manston at the moment, the numbers there from a peak of 4,000 just a week or so ago is down to under 1,000 now.
I'm going to be talking a little later in the programme to somebody in Albania about this. We know at one point the number of Albanians coming across in the small boats was 24%, 25%, probably over a third now. But in the last few weeks, it's dramatically increased the number.
Yes, I mean, we were told that the beginning of the year, there weren't too many Albanians that came across, but the back half of the year in particular, there's been a big surge in Albanians coming across. It's 60% of those on the small boats currently are Albanian. And taken across the whole year, if you then calculate parts of the year when there wasn't so many, that's still a third of all the crossings, of the 40,000 or so crossings this year, are Albanians, which is incredible given what a small nation it is.
Just finally, the Albanian Prime Minister gave a series of interviews. He's objecting to the way he thinks Albanian people who are coming here are being demonised. What evidence is there that some of them are involved in criminal gangs?
Well, look, I mean, he's the Prime Minister of his country. He's got to take that robust stance in defence of his own nation. But the fact is, many of those, a good proportion of those who are coming across, from what we've been told from senior law enforcement officials, are coming across either directly and willingly to enter into the criminal trade with these Albanian criminal gangs here, who are increasingly now in charge of most of the cannabis trade in the UK and in full control of the cocaine trade in the south of the country. Those who are not coming over willingly to work for the criminals, some of them who can't afford the price of that £3,000 ticket to get on a boat, they're told, well, you can come and work for us and pay off your ticket. So they enter the criminal sphere that way. And then there are others who are coming across that want to effectively get into the illegal economy, go into construction or whatever job that they've got lined up to make money to send home to Albania. And then after 6 months or a year, they return back to their home nation.
All right, that's Mark White, who is, of course, GB News Home and Security Editor. Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is Liri Kutchi, who's an Albanian activist who lives in London. Good afternoon to you. Can you explain to me why so many of your countrymen and women are flocking to Britain in such numbers?
Hello, thank you for having me. Hello from the barbarian lands. Yeah, it's quite concerning that actually lately we are not being treated as humans, and humans with subjectivity rather than mere statistics. So I would otherwise pose this question. I would like to know why this government that takes pride on the so-called emancipatory policies, multiculturalism, human rights and democracy is not concerned about any of these notions recently. Why British politicians are not concerned about the life of these Albanian immigrants undergoing these huge risks on taking the boats to build their lives elsewhere in order to escape the corruption and economic misery. Because yes, we are aware that Albania is facing a lot of economic and sharp political issues and topics here.
Lyria, you talked about the barbarian lands. Nobody has called Albanians barbarians in representing this government. But can you explain to people watching this, they're curious because there is no war in Albania, so people are not being persecuted. So why are they coming to Britain in such large numbers? Because if they're claiming asylum, what claiming asylum from what?
Actually, you don't need a war in order to seek for a better
life. Can you explain what they're being persecuted for? What are they being persecuted for? What are they fleeing?
Albania is actually facing sharp political problems and economical problems. So in our so-called democratic era that we are allowed to go elsewhere and invest our labor force in order to escape from misery. So I would like to know why is Great Britain, shifting the discourse from the real structural problems in the UK rather than being concerned about human rights in this situation? And why does the media talk only about this healthy man rather than other marginalized categories who have to leave Albania, such as Roma people, women, children, and disabled people?
Coming from Albania are economic migrants. That's it. They're coming here for a better life, but we've got a system here, and they're crossing the channel illegally. They're breaking the law. Some of them then disappear. Some of them then become involved, as you heard from our Home Editor, Mark White, in illegal gang activity. That's why people in this country are concerned. That's why the Home Secretary has highlighted the numbers of Albanians coming here. A year ago, just a handful. Now there are thousands coming here.
Actually, this is the portrayal in media. Yeah, I've been reading a lot from BBC calling us foreign offenders and, trying to scapegoat Albanian men as being invaders and criminals. But please...
No, can I stop you there? The Home Secretary, when she referred to an invasion, she was not talking about Albanians. She was talking generally about the numbers of people pouring into Britain across the Channel. Already 40,000 this year, will almost certainly be 50,000 this year, but she did not single out Albanians.
I've been reading the news and I've been following the British media.
Lily, I heard the speech. She did not single out Albanians.
Albanians are called invaders and criminals. So how can it be, a small population, less than 3 million people actively living in Albania, how can they be invaders? And besides the ethical implications that this has for all immigrants, what about this is an ethical and political nonsense, because if we are invaders or immigrants are invaders, what about UK colonizing half of the world and appropriating economic resources and human resources till now?
Lily, I'm going to thank you for joining us, but we don't want a history lesson. We're not going into colonial history. But thank you very much. That's Liri Kuchi, who's an Albanian activist who lives in London. Thanks for joining us. Emma, just for the record, because I read Hansard, when the Home Secretary said, deliberately provocatively, we're under invasion, Kent is under invasion, she was not saying Albanians. She did say in her speech, however, that there's been a sharp increase in the number of Albanians, some of whom have become involved in criminal gangs, some of whom, she says, are pretending they're under the age of 18 when they're clearly not. Do you think Albanians are being unfairly demonised?
I think there are so many complexities around this. I think the people coming from Albania who are desperately trying to escape economic turmoil and political turmoil in their own country are not the same as the criminal gangs who are running the routes. And I think we do need to separate those two groups of people, because if we just say they're all criminals, then we are in danger of demonising a whole group of people that we shouldn't be demonising. There are criminals running the routes, there are criminals, as Mark was saying, making an awful lot of money out of misery. And I think there are a great many things that we could be doing better in order to change that, change the way that people try to come here, change the fact that people may not want to come here in the first place, change the way that we manage the system when they do arrive, and change the way that we manage the system if we decide that they are not appropriate people for us to be giving asylum or to get a visa. So I think there are so many different questions that need to be raised, and I think none of that is helped when people like the Home Secretary simply make it a matter of rhetoric and using terms like invasion rather than actually doing the hard yards and putting the work in to have a system. Cooling the rhetoric and increasing the dialogue is what's needed in this.
I think, apart from the cost of living crisis, I think what's happening across the Channel is turning into one of the talking points in the country, one of the big issues. I don't want to bring Brexit into it, but of course it was all about border control. Some said the sense that thousands of people are crossing the border. We've got a cost of living crisis. The NHS is under huge pressure. There's not enough homes for people. So the more people who are coming in illegally, often disappearing because the processing system is a shambles, it's becoming, in my view, the big political issue.
I think it's one of the big political issues. I think, and I don't wish to deny that, I think it's self-defeating when people on the left try to pretend that people aren't concerned about this, particularly people in Kent. I've got family in East Kent. I know that it is very difficult for people to have a proper conversation about this and to be heard and to feel that they're being heard when they raise concerns. So I don't wish to deny any of that. I don't think it is as pressing as the cost of living for most people, particularly people outside of the southeast where the landings are happening, where the processes are happening and or in many ways not happening, certainly not happening in any sense well. I do think that there are complexities around this. So you mentioned the NHS crisis. Part of the NHS crisis is a staffing crisis.
Yeah.
We are bringing more and more people in from abroad in order to staff the NHS. That's not necessarily part of the dialogue when we talk about immigration, but it needs to be. We had one of the sort of leading Brexiteers yesterday saying, this isn't the Brexit I asked for, I need staff. So I think there are really lots and lots of complex issues around immigration and asylum, which are two separate things that we do need to make sure that we talk about differently. And a lot of this, again, as I say, is better dealt with, that instead of trying to make it an us versus them rhetorical, you like migrants, we're going to have tough borders, actually let's talk about how we work together to make a system that works.
That's Emma talking to me in the studio. I think this, if the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, she talks a good talk on this, doesn't she? But if she doesn't get a grip and actually stop these boats coming in such numbers, the Tory party will be absolutely annihilated. at the next general election, and frankly will deserve to. Let's get your views on this too. People are still complaining about the Just Stop Oil protesters. Andrew says, what the hell are they talking about? Just stop oil and build nuclear. We'd need tons of oil to allow nuclear power stations to be built. What's the theory? Take us back to the Stone Age. They're bonkers. On the economy, Alan says, the Prime Minister and Chancellor scratching their heads over how to balance the books, something Liz Truss didn't do. Who's she? Given that together the pandemic and the energy crisis have been unprecedented in terms of the billions we're in debt, it's time to temporarily set the 2019 pledge aside to raise income tax. And no, we have to raise it. Thank you for your views. Keep them coming in. Email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, Russia's defence ministry says the troops have been withdrawn from the southern city of Ukraine in Kherson. We'll have more on that after the break.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Humiliating climb down for Vladimir Putin, or does it? And his blood war in Ukraine. Russia has announced it's completely withdrawn from Kherson, one of the country's southern cities. It seems there may be a possibility that Kherson could be back in Ukrainian hands by the end of the day. It's been nearly 9 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, only in September when President Putin illegally annexed 4 occupied regions in Ukraine, including Kherson. Let's talk to journalist Danny Armstrong, who knows all about it. Danny, why am I very sceptical and anxious about this, that I keep reading and hearing that the Russians are noisily withdrawing from Kherson, a place that Putin wants to keep? Is there something else going on?
Well, you're very right to be sceptical, of course, as we can never second-guess Putin. He's been very quiet on it as it happens. I mean, this has been a very loud withdrawal from Kherson. What has actually happened is that the Russian troops have withdrawn from the right bank, which is on the west side of the Dnieper River. If we were getting into it in the geography of the Dnieper River, it sort of cuts Ukraine in half in the north and then comes down like a scythe, and the city of Kherson would be in the south, right at the bottom. Now, the Russian troops, around about 20 or 30,000, were located on the right bank on the west. They have completely withdrawn over those bridges, supply lines, and blown them up for good measure, those bridges, over to the left side. Now, there was some murmurs, especially from Ukraine's defense ministry, that this is a ruse, that the Russians are feigning weakness in Kherson to draw them in. The fact of the matter is that the Russians are extremely wary of a counterattack by Ukraine. They're extremely wary of risking personnel. They've had huge losses just at the start of November in Pavlivka, which is in Donetsk region, where they lost 300 bodies in the space of 4 days. So we're seeing real bodies kind of tore up. There were bodies strewn all over the battlefield in Pavlivka. The Kremlin doesn't want that. If anything, it's also a threat to political stability, because if the fighting age of men in the army is completely decimated, like this brigade was in Pavlivka, then it would lead to political instability in Russian society.
But do any of these images get back to Russia?
Well, that's a very important question as well, because if we get over to the propaganda side of it, which of course is my former field, the official line is a regrouping rather than a retreat. Now, it's entirely logical that the Russian forces have withdrawn from the slither of land that they occupy on the right bank of the Dnieper River to the left bank, where it's much easier to defend the rest of the Kherson region. But in terms of the retreat is absolutely finished today. The last of the Russians made their way over the bridges. The bridges were being targeted by the Ukrainian forces. It was much better to get across and then blow them up fully rather than supply those troops on the right bank and of course withstand that counterattack and the attacks on those bridges by the Ukrainian forces. Now, the supply lines were very weak. Russia really doesn't want another Kharkiv. We saw that in the northeast, where they lost huge personnel losses, huge territorial losses, and it ended in a humiliating retreat back to Donetsk. However, Russian propaganda kind of goes against the grain, to put it lightly. This is a regrouping, a relocation. As I said, it's entirely logical to get those troops back to the Donetsk region, which is what happened after Kharkiv, and to probably see out the winter, because as winter sets in that part of the region, it's extremely difficult to get anything done on the ground. I predicted that there would be a last push for Kherson before the winter hit.
Right.
I was right about that, but I also was wrong about something, and I'm very, very glad. I thought there would be a big battle for Kherson. It looks like, in the face of these Ukrainian counterattacks, the Russians have completely retreated, and they don't want another humiliation, and they don't want another big battle before winter.
And winter coming, what happens now? Does the war just sort of go into cold storage?
Well, what I would suspect, and of course we never want to second-guess Vladimir Putin, who I mentioned has been very, very quiet on the matter. What I would predict to happen now is a regrouping, a relocation over to Donetsk. As I said, the Kherson region, we mustn't forget that the city of Kherson, the only administrative city that the Russians have had under their occupation during this 9-month war, which started off as a 3-day special operation, let's not forget. That is the city, that is empty, that is completely empty of Russian troops. Some Ukrainian flags have been returned to their places on administrative buildings. I would predict that there would be a relocation over to Donetsk region, over to Donbass, and that would probably be it for the Russian side until the mobilized troops can be fully trained and fully integrated into their forces and mount another offensive, because there's not been an offensive from the Russian side for some time, and this is exactly why, because they're wary of losing men.
Just briefly, are we seeing an end in sight to this war?
I'm always wary of answering that question affirmatively or negatively. I would say we're getting towards some sort of big turning point. We've seen these turning points before. We've seen a turning point with Kharkiv. We're seeing a turning point now with Kherson. Whatever we're being told from either side, the fact of the matter is Russia has had a mass retreat. What I am reading for some Russian sources and some pro-Russian sources included in that is that they see not only an end to the war, but kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, as it were, in terms of Vladimir Putin's reign, in sort of the first bricks being removed from that wall.
Fascinating. That's the journalist Danny Armstrong. Zelensky, of course, man of the year, isn't he? Your views coming up on the nursing strike. We've got so many on this today. Gareth says, let's not forget when the government was going to sack thousands of nurses for not having a COVID jab. So what's the difference for them to strike? Terry says, if the NHS cut the amount of overpaid management, they'll be able to pay nurses a decent wage. You're right, Terry, and they've been increasing middle management in the last few months. I'm going through cancer treatment at the moment, says another at the moment, and can't thank the nurses enough for their kindness and support and feel they deserve a decent wage. Thanks for your views. Keep them coming in. Email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up after the break, Just Stop Oil. We're going to halt the protests on the M25. I'll believe that when I see it. We're going to hear the views of a police commissioner. Are they still policing Just Stop Oil? And a Just Stop Oil protester. So stay with us. It should be spicy. Before that, your news update.
Good afternoon. It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt's warning there's a tough road ahead, saying difficult decisions will be needed to restore confidence and economic stability. His comments come as the latest official figures show the UK economy contracted by 0.2% between July and September. The data from the Office for National Statistics follows the Bank of England's warning last week that the UK may be heading for a 2-year recession. Ukraine says it's in the final stages of reclaiming the city of Kherson from Russia. Ukrainian soldiers have been celebrating the retreat of Russian troops, waving the national flag in the region's capital. Russia says the withdrawal is complete. Its soldiers crossed the Dnipro River to the eastern bank this morning, with reports many of them drowned. Despite the retreat, the Kremlin claims Kherson is still part of Russia. UK authorities and coastguards are preparing for a significant surge in small boats crossing the English Channel this weekend. Bad weather has stopped migrants from illegally reaching the coast for almost a fortnight. But GB News understands with the improving weather, crime groups from Albania are planning a mass launch of small boats from French beaches tomorrow. And Heathrow Airport says it won't be limiting passenger numbers this festive season as it gears up for its biggest Christmas in 3 years. The West London Airport's had 50 million passengers pass through its doors so far this year, almost 75% of pre-pandemic levels. Heathrow says a passenger cap won't be needed as it has a good plan in place ahead of the Christmas peak. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew Pearce will be back in just a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Just Stop Oil, I call them the eco-fanatics, have said they're to pause their protests. How gracious of them, that have disrupted the M25 over the past few days, to give the government time to reconsider issuing fresh licences for oil and gas extraction. There were 32 days of disruption that started from the end of September and through most of October and ended, resulting in police officers working a total of 9,438 additional shifts. Joining us now on this show is Donna Jones, who's the Conservative Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner. Donna, can I just say, I'm sick of this. Everybody's sick of it. What happens is they block motorways, they climb up motorway gantries, they get arrested, they might get an injunction, they're back there a few days later. It is becoming, this is making a mockery of the law.
Yes, it absolutely is. I completely agree with you. And, you know, I feel very much for those police officers at the moment, as you've just said, that have spent over 9,000 hours policing motorways, junctions, bridges to get these criminals down from public infrastructure. They have affected, you know, over 1 million people's lives now, but of course that is their intent. Now, the government are doing something around the law. There have been some greater clarification issued to police forces over the last 6 weeks, and we do know there has been a tightening of the law to make sure that police are empowered to be able to remove people as quickly as they can. I really think the Just Stop Oil campaigners are not taking anybody on this journey with them. There is pretty much zero public sympathy for them now. They are losing their battle in terms of highlighting their cause in a positive way, where people have empathy with them that the government should or could be doing more quickly. I think that this is probably slightly politically motivated against a Conservative government. Would it be quite as robust if it was a Labour government? I ask that question. But, you know, certainly there is a lot of criminal activity. It's right and proper that people do go to prison. And in fact, I would also go one step further and say that we should be looking at seizing their assets by changing the legislation so that they can, if they're not bothered about going to prison for 3 months, let's look at seizing their assets, which would then be more impactful to them in the longer term.
Well, 183 have been issued with injunctions, Donna, and they're back within a few days, so these injunctions aren't worth the paper they're written on. But what do you take from the Chief Constable, Chris Noble, who was asked about the Home Secretary's, she's in charge of law and order, by the way, Suella Braverman, she says they've got to crack down, and she says, Chris Noble, who's one of the Chief Constables involved, says, what we need is a conversation about protesters' rights. Don't you just want to bang your hands down on your desk in total despair? That is what a Chief Constable was saying. We need a conversation. The time for talking has stopped.
Yeah, I mean, I do take despair at those comments from Chris. You're absolutely right. It doesn't reflect where we're at as a country. We have to be standing up as police commissioners, as politicians. Our Home Secretary, she is prioritising the rights of the everyday man and woman. She is prioritising the rights and the needs of those people who are trying to get to their parents' funeral, that are trying to get to hospital, that are trying to get to work or go on holiday or whatever it might be. She is standing up for the law-abiding vast majority of British people. And actually, I was at a summit yesterday in London with nearly all the Chief Constables in the country and almost all of the Police and Crime Commissioners. And we had somebody there from the Green Party. And I have to say, the glory at which she described these protesters, she referred to them as heroes. I was absolutely incredulous that this is the way that people would behave or would be acting in terms of people who are committing serious crimes, affecting millions of people's lives. It is criminal. I think because of what they're doing, we can see some greater clarification and more power to the arm of the police coming out of the Home Office through the Home Secretary over the next coming days. They're almost forcing the hand of the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice to do that. And police chiefs, they need to be listening to this. They need to be taking note. And actually, the vast majority of them are. We've had protests in my patch at Farnborough Airport yesterday. We've had protests on the top of the M3 as it joins the M25, right on the Hampshire-Surrey border this week. But I do feel for the victims of some pretty awful crimes around the M25 that live in Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Surrey, Kent, Essex, those who've had to wait longer for a police response because 9,000 hours have been taken up of good, decent police officers who have instead been diverted to this utterly criminal behaviour. It's just not good enough.
Just finally and briefly, the Home Secretary can shout and holler as much as she likes, but if police chief constables don't enforce in a tough way, it's just empty rhetoric.
Well, if it's not, she does have the power of the arm of her police and crime commissioners, because ultimately, if a chief constable is not doing what they need to do in terms of policing the protests, ultimately the police and crime commissioner can hold them to account, and the ultimate line on that one is to sack them. So actually, the Home Secretary, whilst not directly but indirectly through police and crime commissioners, she has the right to ask us to consider if she believes that there is a willful refusal from a chief constable to enforce the law and take the action that is needed. Now, of course, police and crime commissioners are not operational cops. It's not for me to direct policing, but it is a conversation. It would be a conversation for me and my chief constable to have if I didn't believe that she was enforcing the law in the way that the majority of the 2 million people that I represent in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight would want her to. Now, that's not the case here. I will like to caveat that. My chief is doing what is needed, and she's doing it well. So there's no criticism in terms of my own force. But ultimately, that's a conversation the Home Secretary could, and I'm sure will be having with the relevant police and crime commissioners.
All right, that's Donna Jones. She's the Conservative Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner. Let's talk to Laura Johnson now, who's a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. Laura.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you.
You're a selfish minority causing huge disruption to people's ordinary lives.
Well, it's very unfortunate that we have been put in this situation.
What's unfortunate?
That the government are ignoring all the scientists of the world, and they are planning to open...
What bit are they ignoring? Because we're doing more in Europe than any other country on wind turbine technology. What are they ignoring?
I mean, we know that we have to move away from fossil fuels, and every week we spend 236 million of taxpayer money goes to subsidise these industries that are making 8 billion profits in 3 months. That's not right.
Do you care when you hear that fire engines and ambulances can't do their job because your fellow activists are disrupting, blocking roads? Do you care about that?
Absolutely. It's awful.
How much do you care?
We care deeply. That's why we're in a situation...
Why do you keep doing it then? Why do you keep doing it?
OK, so are you aware that in the 4 days of disruption...
No, I'm asking you the question. Why do you keep doing it?
I'm explaining everything. My answer is explaining why. In the last 4 days of disruption, over 1,000 people in the UK have died from a direct cause of air pollution caused from the fossil fuel industry. What do you think about that?
Have you got evidence for that? Laura, where's your evidence for that claim?
I can happily send a link. I'll tweet you a link, shall I?
Because you're quite fond of peppering programmes like this with figures and statistics, and then when you're asked, you always say, we'll provide them. It's like the people who want to insulate, the insulation organisation, pro-insulation. Of course, we all want to insulate Britain. Ask them how much it costs. Haven't a clue.
But we know that we're spending 236 million every week, taxpayer money going to the fossil fuel industry. We could divert that money straight into insulation. I mean, I had a question for Donna Jones.
She's gone. But do ask the question.
I wanted to ask her. So, climate breakdown is going to be the biggest threat to law and order in the country, and how does she feel that the police are preparing for that?
How do you know that?
Because we're going to have food shortages. We've already got food shortages. And really, if the media were doing their job and letting people know how bad it actually is, in the UK, we're set to lose 50% of our potato harvest. We've already lost a third of our wheat harvest. And next year, we're going to lose our fruit harvest. So there will be...
You're making all these apocalyptic predictions with absolutely not a single fact or figure at your fingertips to show us.
Again, I will happily...
Will you? That's very gracious of you.
Yes,
don't you think you should have the information? Hang on, Laura. Don't you think you should have the information with you when you spray programmes like this with these wild allegations?
Well, I could also say the same, because we hear all the time on programmes like this that England are world leaders and we only produce 1% of CO2 emissions. And actually, we don't include aviation, transportation, the military and our imported goods, which mostly come from China. So,
right. But why do you think it is, Laura, that you're so unpopular? Poll after poll shows people can't stand your tactics.
The truth hurts and people like to shoot the messenger. And when they realise we're not the bad guys, and they realise that they've been let down by their government and by media...
So when someone can't get to hospital for their cancer appointment, when somebody can't get to a funeral, when they can't get to their job, You're saying it's the government's the bad guys, you're not the bad guys, you don't accept you've got a role in this?
I'm also saying that it's down to people like you, Andrew. Like, I think that you should...
You're unrepentant, aren't you?
Me,
you're unrepentant. You're not apologetic at all, are you? You're smug.
not at all. Not at all. This is awful. I feel terrible that we're in this situation.
Do you really feel terrible? You don't look like you're struggling with it.
I think that's because you're asking me to provide figures, and I will do that afterwards. I'm here to talk about my own experience of this. You know, this summer we had 40-degree heat. We had birds falling out the sky. We had train tracks buckling from the heat. 60 people lost their homes. We had 1,600 dying in those 48 hours of 40-degree heat. And that's the UK. And I shouldn't be here to tell you that. You guys should be reporting that yourselves.
All right, Laura. OK. Laura Johnson is a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. Emma Burnell's here with me, journalist and playwright, and you have great sympathy with the objectives, but you don't agree with the tactics.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I am 100% in agreement with Laura about the crisis that we're in and the need for a real ramping up of government action, both in terms of increasing our renewables and our ability to create and have our own energy within the UK that is completely renewable, with a nuclear baseline, something that I've completely changed my mind on in the last 20 years. I was very much anti-nuclear 20 years ago. I've come to accept that there are trade-offs to be made when you're dealing with a crisis, and that for me is one of them. I think there are really important factors that she said about things coming from China, about when we talk about our emissions, it's, you know, partly it's because we've destroyed our own manufacturing base, that we are less of an emitting country nowadays. And we're a smaller country. Even though we're a reasonably large economy, we are a smaller country, so we are going to be emitting less, but we are consuming a great deal. However, having said all of that, all of the reasons I agree with Laura's passion, as someone who has thought most of my life, been involved in campaigning, helps to train people around the world who campaign on climate change, what I don't see is something which is called a theory of change, why taking this action in this way is going to lead to the outcomes that you're looking for. And at the moment, I see lots of actions being taken, but no understanding of that journey to the outcome. And the people who are going to make the decisions that Laura wants to see happen are the government and legislators and international bodies. And I don't see any of them being persuaded by giving them a really easy target like this.
Exactly. That's Emma Burnell. Now, just want to share with one of my favourite groups. Hundreds of black cab drivers are giving up their morning to take veterans to the cenotaph, including the one in Whitehall and more local ones. Now in their 13th year, Poppy Cabs is funded entirely by the drivers who provide their taxis free of charge. They also raise money for the Royal British Legion by selling a special badge, and I'm wearing mine right now. Joining me in the studio now is Mike Hughes, a taxi driver for the Poppy Cab. Mike, 13 years, hundreds of your colleagues now are engaged in this.
They certainly are. I've got a database with over 300 drivers and 150 helpers, plus there's a load more turn up on the actual day. It's something that is done as a thank you to our veterans who have all been willing to put their lives on their line so that we can have the freedoms that we have now.
You've also taken some of these veterans, Mike, I know, back to France to see war graves, back to the beaches where they were perhaps part of the Normandy landings.
I've had the privilege of being able to go to Normandy as a driver for the taxi charity for military veterans, which is, although separate to Poppy Cabs, we work very closely together. My last veteran was a 102-year-old Major Edwin Hunt, and I was able to take him to Holland for 10 days this year for something very, very special. If I can take a moment to tell you his history, he was born in 1920, sent to Narvik in Norway in 1940, age 20, pulled out from there when Dunkirk happened, then went to East Anglia to shore up the defences. He was a multi-generational waterman and lighterman, recruited along with other watermen, and on D-Day he was by then a captain in charge of 15 special low-draft rhino barges on D-Day on Gold Beach. In 1945, he and the Dutch engineer designed and built what became the longest all-floating Bailey Bridge of World War II, 1,222 metres long. And in 1945, or so at the end of the war, he started a school for watermen and lightermen, and in 1978, he was appointed the Queen's Barge Master for 12 years. So when he said he'd done it, when he said he'd met them, he had. Heck of a character.
Great character. And on Sunday, how important is it that these old boys, a lot of them are ladies too, some of them will be their carers with them too, that you managed to get them to the cenotaph?
For many of them, especially those in wheelchairs or with ambulatory problems, it's the only way for them to get there and back easily. They will get there, whatever. They're that determined, but it can cause them a lot of pain. But remember also, it isn't just the older people. We have people from other conflicts, Ireland, Afghanistan, Iraq, who are also going there to say, or to remember their fallen comrades. Remember, we do not celebrate war, we commemorate it to remind us of the horrors, absolute horrors of war.
And for those old boys in particular, and I must say that the ladies too, women too, they're part of a community often, and that's what coming back together on these occasions, whether it's in France or at the cenotaph, matters.
Absolutely. When you see them together, there's an old-fashioned thing called banter. As I said, with my veteran, he was stubborn, opinionated, cantankerous, kept trying to give people orders that would never do as he's told. And he said exactly the same about me.
Yeah. He
would look at me and say, fancy waking up and realising you're Welsh. To which my riposte was, it could have been worse, I could have been born on the East End of London. And that's the kind of thing as banter. Unfortunately, for some people today, they take things far too literally. The words taken literally could be taken offensively. They're banter. And that's the kind of thing that our older veterans and some of the newer ones deal in. They're so used to the banter going backwards and forwards. It doesn't hurt them, it cheers them in actual fact.
So just so people might want to check on your website, what's your taxi called, the Poppy Taxi Cab?
Right, we've got one this year that's been sponsored. It's called Scarlet. Why Scarlet? Well, first of all, it's scarlet in colour, but it also reminds us of the scarlet colour of the flower of the poppy, the scarlet colour of the Chelsea pensioners, and the scarlet colour of the various guards' uniforms. And I think you can see a picture on there now.
There it is, looks terrific.
Thank you. And we are taking Chelsea pensioners onto Westminster Bridge. Those who are unable to walk very far but are too proud to sit in a wheelchair, we take to Westminster Bridge, where they are the stars while we're waiting. And we stand there to mark the 11th hour. And if ever you want to do something really, really, really emotional, stand there as Big Ben chants the 11th hour with all 4 of your children stood next to you. I didn't cry at the time, did afterwards.
Oh, well, Mike, it's been a joy to have you in the studio. An old friend of mine is Mike Hughes. He's a taxi driver for the Poppy Cab charity. Emma Bennell's been with me in the studio. You've been watching me, Andrew Pearce, here on GB News. Don't go anywhere, though, as up next, it's the briefing with Alistair Stewart. Before that, the weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. The milder weather continues throughout this weekend. The winds should be lighter tomorrow, and that will allow some fog to form overnight. Still very gusty out there through the rest of today. The isobars really close together. This weather front is slowly sinking south. It's made for a very wet couple of days across the Highlands and the Western Isles of Scotland, but it is easing off now, bringing some lighter rain to southern Scotland and actually the far north of England too. That rain then likely to push back north into parts of Northern Ireland, back across southern Scotland during the early hours. Most of England and Wales stay dry. The winds ease off a touch. It will be a little cooler than last night, certainly in northern Scotland, but still